Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dreamland Encounters. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My life in the skies has always been about routine, charter flights, sightseeing trips, nothing out of the ordinary. Over a decade of flying small aircraft teaches you to expect the expected. That winter afternoon was crisp and clear, with thin clouds stretching across the sky. The sunlight looked washed out, silvery and weak. 30 minutes from landing near Sheridan, something changed. What I saw defied every logical explanation. A metallic disc dropped vertically from the clouds. No wobble, no hesitation. It stopped mid-air, hanging for just 2 breathless seconds before shooting horizontally and vanishing into the mountain haze. No sound, no trace. My pilot's instincts kicked in immediately. I scanned my instruments, expecting something to be off. Everything remained perfectly normal. I'd seen plenty in the sky, but this was different. Not another plane, no wings, just an impossibly smooth movement that felt wrong. After landing at the private airstrip, I noticed them before I even fully shut down the engine. 2 men standing in the building's shadow. Black suits, white shirts, dark ties, dressed like government agents, but something was off. No coats, despite the freezing 25-degree temperature. One tall and lean, the other shorter and broad-shouldered. Both unnaturally pale, as if sunlight was a distant memory. They knew my name before I could even process their presence. "Mr. Harlan," the tall one said in a flat, almost robotic tone. The shorter man held a clipboard, looking directly at me. "We understand you observed an aerial anomaly during your approach. I hadn't told a soul. How could they know?" I signed my name without reading the form, eager to end the strange encounter. The shorter man snatched the clipboard the instant my pen lifted, tucking it under his arm. I stepped back in perfect sync, as if our conversation had concluded. No pleasantries, no handshake. The taller one gave a slight nod before they turned and walked into the hangar's shadowy depths. I hesitated, wondering whether to follow, but when I stepped inside, the space was completely empty. No open doors, no alternate exits where they could have disappeared without me noticing. The whole airstrip felt abandoned. The usual guy who handled my arrivals was nowhere to be seen. The fuel truck sat parked, its driver absent. Wind rattled the hangar doors behind the 2 men who had approached me moments earlier. Federal jurisdiction. The shorter man had repeated when I asked which agency they represented, as if that explained everything. They wanted me to sign a form confirming some atmospheric interference, with small print suggesting no threat to flight safety. But something felt off. "I saw a metallic object," I'd said slowly. The shorter man stepped closer, so near I could see tiny details in his irises. Unnaturally uniform, almost grey. "The object you saw was not metallic," he corrected me firmly. "It was atmospheric interference." I glanced toward the terminal building, hoping someone might emerge. But the windows were dark. It struck me then that I hadn't heard another engine or voice since landing. The taller man had extended the clipboard again. "Please sign, Mr. Harland. We have other matters to attend to." A plane starting up somewhere down the airstrip broke the unnatural silence, pulling me back to the moment. But those 2 men had vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions. It was about 10 at night, maybe a little later, when I stepped out on the porch with a cup of tea. Living on the edge of town means quiet evenings, and this night was crystal clear. The cold, crisp air carried sound in a way that made everything feel sharp and alive. Leaning on the railing, I looked up at the sky packed with stars. One star caught my attention. Something felt off about it. It wasn't moving like a typical aircraft. Instead, it drifted, stopped, then jerked sideways with an almost purposeful motion. For a full minute, I watched it arc perfectly around another star before stopping dead, as if checking its position. I chuckled, thinking I might be overtired, but then the star began to glow brighter, subtly intensifying. When I turned to set down my mug, I glanced back and it had vanished completely, not faded, just gone. The next morning at the cafe, everything seemed normal. I opened up at 6 o'clock, wiping down tables between serving the usual local crowd. Around 8 o'clock, the bell rang and 2 men walked in, both wearing immaculate black suits and fedoras. No coats, despite the freezing temperature. They walked directly to a booth and sat down, keeping their hats on and never acknowledging me. Later, when I was at the airfield, everything felt strangely quiet. My ground crew guy appeared, asking about fuel. When I mentioned the two men from earlier, he looked confused and said no one had been around all day. I didn't argue. After fueling up, I discovered my flight log was missing. The pen was still clipped to the side, but the notepad had vanished. I never saw those men again. I was working the morning shift at the cafe when two customers walked in and sat down in a booth. From the start, something felt off. When I approached and asked if they wanted menus, they didn't respond. One of them gave the tiniest headshake, but remained silent. I assumed they were waiting for someone and went back to work. But as time passed, I noticed how strange they were. They sat completely motionless, facing forward, and every time I moved around the cafe, one would subtly turn his head to track my movements. Not an obvious stare, but enough to make my skin crawl. Loca. Regulars came and went. Some would glance at the booth, then quickly look away, seemingly eager to avoid any interaction. When Chelsea arrived to take over the morning shift, she gave me a knowing look that said, "What's going on with those guys?" I stuck around for a few minutes to grab a coffee before leaving. That's when things got truly unsettling. As I poured my coffee, the man sitting inside the booth leaned slightly toward his companion, not as if whispering, but listening. The other man's lips moved almost imperceptibly, like he was speaking without making a sound. The cafe was quiet. I could hear the cooler humming and dishes clinking in the back, but from their booth, nothing. Yet I felt a strange pressure in my ears, similar to standing too close to a loudspeaker. When I turned back after putting the lid on my coffee, they were both staring directly at me. No blinking, no expression, just watching. I left quickly. Outside, a black SUV with heavily tinted windows was parked right in front of the cafe. I hadn't even heard it arrive. As I walked to my truck, trying not to look, I noticed movement. Both men were now standing in the cafe doorway, perfectly synchronized, staring right at me. I started my truck and pulled out, checking the rearview mirror. They stood on the sidewalk. At first, they didn't follow, but when I reached the first stop sign and looked back, the SUV was rolling out of the parking lot. Around 9:40 p.m. that early October night, the ranger station phone rang. Nights were quiet that time of year, after the summer crowds had died down. I was on night shift at Clear Falls State Park, mostly checking locked gates and patrolling the campground once or twice while sitting in the truck with the radio on low. Darren from the bait shop called. Two fishermen had just come in, both raffled. They'd seen strange lights over the lake about half an hour earlier. One claimed it looked like a lantern drifting under the water but moving too fast. The other described a spotlight shining straight up from below. Darren thought it might be poachers, so he wanted me to know. I signed out the truck keys, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out. The lake was a 10-minute drive from the station. It was a calm night with just a slight breeze, and the moon was barely a sliver. Wet leaves scented the air. Near the turnoff to the North Shore lot, I noticed a black sedan parked just inside the access road. No plates that I could see. The car was angled so its headlights pointed toward the trees, not the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe a visitor had gotten lost. Then I saw them. Two men standing on the path leading down to the water. They were facing the lake, still as fence posts. Both wore dark, pressed, tailored suits and wide-brimmed hats that obscured their faces. No fishing rods, no cameras, just standing there. Weeks later, I kept thinking I saw that same SUV parked on side streets or in the grocery store lot, always far enough away that I couldn't be sure. They never came back into the cafe, but sometimes when I'm outside late, I get the same tight feeling in my ears, like that low-pressure hum is just under the quiet. I stayed a couple cars back, never speeding, never getting too close. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, but they followed me all the way to the edge of town. When I turned onto the county road, they went straight. That night, I went out on the porch again, half expecting to see that star moving around like before. The sky was clear, the same as the night before, but that spot where I'd first seen it was empty. I pulled up near the parked black sedan and got out, my boots crunching on the gravel. Two men turned to look at me, their movements perfectly synchronized. The first one tapped forward, his voice deep and completely flat. "You'll need to return to the station," he said, without a hint of emotion. I explained that I was the on-duty ranger responding to reports of lights on the lake. "This location is under federal jurisdiction tonight," he responded in the same monotone voice. When I asked them to identify themselves, the second man quickly showed me something that looked like an ID wallet. I caught a brief glimpse of a seal, maybe an eagle, but it vanished before I could be certain. "We don't usually have federal officers here without notice," I said. "Notice has been given," came the reply. When I asked who was notified, he simply stared at me, Not angrily, not impatiently, just stared as if waiting for me to stop talking. The silence grew until I could hear the wind moving branches overhead. Something felt off about their presence. It wasn't a threatening feeling exactly, but more like walking into a room where everyone knows something you don't. A strange, uncomfortable awareness settled over me. "All right, I'll call this in," I finally said. "You will not." The first man immediately responded. "Return to the station." My stomach tightened. Glancing toward the water, I noticed a faint light rippling across the surface about 100 yards out. There was no obvious source. Not the moon, not a boat. It seemed to be coming from beneath the water. When I looked back, both men were watching me intently, waiting to see my next move. I suddenly wanted to leave. Not out of fear, but because I felt I wasn't supposed to be witnessing whatever was happening. I nodded, said all right, and walked back to my truck. They didn't follow or move. Driving out, I saw the black sedan still parked, engine off, no lights on. Back at the station, I sat at my desk and stared at the phone for a long time. I didn't call anyone. Around midnight, I decided to swing back toward the lake, thinking maybe they'd be gone by then. When I got there, the shoreline was empty. The sedan had disappeared, with no light on the water and no footprints on the gravel. The air felt colder, though that could have just been a normal temperature drop. The next morning, I asked other rangers if anyone knew about federal officers visiting the park. Nobody had heard anything. I checked the incident logs, but found nothing. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Darren's bait shop and asked about those lights. He gave me a strange look and claimed he didn't know what I was talking about. When I reminded him about his call to me the night before, he just shook his head and said he must have been thinking of someone else. I didn't press the issue. That night, driving past the lake on my way home, I slowed at the North Shore turnoff. It was empty, no sedan, no figures, just dark trees and cricket sounds. I kept driving. It was late February, one of those grey weeks where sunlight seemed absent. I'd been spending long nights in the meteorology lab at school, a senior majoring in atmospheric science. My advisor had let me use archive satellite imagery for my thesis. Most of the work was routine: jet streams, cloud formations, occasional Pacific hurricanes, but I enjoyed it. The lab was quiet after dark, allowing me to work without interruption. One Tuesday night, while reviewing infrared images from a NOAA satellite feed, something caught my eye. Around 2 a.m., I noticed a series of frames over the Midwest showing a perfect circular heat signature amid normal cloud cover. It wasn't massive, maybe a couple miles across, but it definitely stood out. The strange part was how it remained stationary. Frame after frame, it just hovered there. Then, between two captures roughly 30 seconds apart, it vanished completely. No dispersal, no drift. Simple. You're gone. I flagged the files and continued working. The next set of images, from a week earlier, showed something similar over the Maine coast. Another perfect circle, completely motionless, disappearing in under a minute. I started noticing something odd in the satellite imagery. At first, I thought it might be a technical glitch, but then I found another instance over southern Nevada. Just 3 days earlier, I began diving deep, zooming in and switching between thermal and visible light layers. In the thermal view, something was unmistakably there. In visible light, nothing but ordinary cloud cover. I kept this to myself, wanting to verify the data before raising any alarms. I started pulling information from multiple sources: European satellites, old MODIS data, hunting for similar patterns. Over the next few nights, my investigation expanded. I discovered 7 more examples stretching back 2 years. Each one was identical, perfectly round, completely motionless, vanishing in less than a minute. By Thursday night, I was methodical. I began a detailed log, screen capturing images, noting precise coordinates and timestamps. By 3 a.m., nearly 30 examples filled my desktop folder. Something felt different, like I'd uncovered something overlooked by everyone else. After a few hours of sleep, I returned to the lab. A sticky note on my monitor demanded I see Dr. Donkai, see Dr. Tesla. Larkin. When I reached his office, he was on the phone. He briefly covered the receiver and told me we needed to talk later. His tone clipped and controlled. 15 minutes later, 2 men appeared. They weren't typical academics. Immaculately dressed in black suits, crisp white shirts, and polished shoes, they looked completely out of place. One was tall and pale with sharp features, the other shorter, broader, with darker skin. The tall one spoke my name like an interrogation. Without introduction or identification, he said they needed to see my workstation. They didn't ask. They simply walked in. The shorter man sat at my terminal, quickly navigating to my research folder. They appeared without warning, tall and short, and quickly took control of my computer. In mere moments, they deleted every single file from my system, images, backups, everything. The process was methodical and swift. I tried to speak, but the tall one cut me off before I could say anything. "You will not attempt to recover these, you understand?" His tone wasn't exactly a threat, but it wasn't a request either. I nodded, my mouth dry. They looked at me, then walked out, turning down the side corridor, leading to the old geology wing. When I followed, they had vanished without a sound. Back at my desk, I discovered my USB drive was also wiped clean. Every backup, every note gone, as if they'd never existed. Dr. Larkin arrived later, casually assigning me a new dataset for my thesis, saying nothing about the mysterious visitors. That night, I worked late in the lab, keeping the lights low. Around 1 a.m., I went to the vending machine. Upon returning, I found a folded paper on my keyboard reading simply, "Stop." The hallway was empty, the building silent except for the air vents hum. For the rest of the semester, I saw no trace of them. I stopped examining the satellite frames and never mentioned my discovery. Yet occasionally when crossing campus late at night, I'd spot a black sedan parked nearby, a silent reminder of that unexplained encounter. The forest was silent that mid-November morning, one of those crisp days where frost lingers even after sunrise. I was out near the old logging road, past Dry Creek, rifle in hand, but wandering more than hunting. This part of the woods is usually empty, just tall spruce trees and occasional crow calls. The snowmobile tracks had disappeared, and I'd cut off the main path to a hidden clearing I knew from previous wanderings. About 100 yards wide and surrounded by evergreens, the clearing was a spot known only to those who regularly explore these woods. As I walked, my boots crunching through the frozen ground while searching for deer tracks, something unusual caught my attention. The light seemed strange, different from normal. At first, I thought it might be a heat shimmer, but my visible breath told me it was far too cold for that. Something in the clearing center looked distorted, like water bending at a river's bottom. Then I saw it. Suspended about 20 feet up, an oval-shaped object with a surface like liquid metal. It perfectly reflected the surrounding trees, blending so seamlessly that I might have missed it if it hadn't been subtly moving. No spinning, no swaying, just hovering silently. The absolute stillness was unnerving. No wind rustled branches, no birds chirped, no distant highway hummed, just complete silence. I'm not sure how long I stood watching. Maybe a minute, perhaps 5. No sound emerged, not even the faint buzz you'd expect from a drone. When I shifted my weight, everything changed. The surface rippled like a pebble dropped in a pond, tilting slightly toward me. An inexplicable feeling washed over me. Somehow, it had noticed me. My stomach dropped. Instinctively, I backed toward the tree line, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I planned to circle back to the logging road and head to my truck. Halfway there, the forest's silence transformed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I gripped my rifle, every sense alert, knowing something fundamental had changed. I rounded a bend on the trail, rifle in hand, finger just outside the trigger guard. Suddenly, they were there. 2 men standing side by side, blocking the path completely. They wore black suits and long coats that seemed wildly out of place in these woods. Everything about them was unnaturally pristine. Not a single speck of frost or mud on their spotless clothing, despite the trail's muddy patches. Their gaze wasn't focused on me or my rifle, but seemed to pass right through me. One of them stepped forward and I noticed his shoes, polished black leather, gleaming impossibly clean. "You've gone off limits," he said. His voice had no discernible accent, but each word fell with a strange, measured cadence that sent a chill down my spine. My mouth went dry. I considered pushing through the trees, trying to skirt around them, but something in their stance made me freeze. The second man spoke, his tone just as flat. "Turn around. Use another route." I attempted to play innocent, claiming I was just out deer hunting and unaware of any boundaries. They didn't react. No blinking, no movement. When I hesitated, they both stepped forward in perfect, synchronized precision, not threatening exactly, but rehearsed. Something clicked. "All right," I muttered, backing up before turning away. I didn't run, but my pace was quick. I wove through thicker trees until I found the main road, constantly expecting to hear footsteps behind me. Nothing. Back at my truck, I noticed a thin layer of frost on the windshield. Strange, since it had been clear that morning. My phone, which had been working fine earlier, was now completely dead. I assumed the cold had drained the battery, but later, at home, it powered on normally, still showing 62% charge. I thought about returning the next day, wanting to understand what had happened, but the weather report predicted heavy snow in that area for the entire week. I never went back, and I don't hunt alone anymore. It was just after 2 in the morning when I first saw it on the cameras. Work eye. NG the night shift at a massive distribution warehouse on the town's edge, 15 loading bays, a small office block, nearly 3 acres of fenced-in lot. My job that night was pretty standard, watching screens, logging truck arrivals, and doing occasional walk-rounds. Most shifts were quiet, almost painfully so. The night was crisp and clear, with wind occasionally gusting but never triggering the motion sensors. Halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee, I glanced at camera 12, the one covering the far corner of the southern yard. Only dim perimeter lights illuminated the area. At first, I thought the screen was malfunctioning, but something caught my eye. A shape sat low near the fence line, nestled close to the trees. It wasn't a truck or any recognizable object. Oddly, it didn't cast shadows like it should have. Instead, a soft, pulsing whitish glow surrounded it. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a reflection? A weird neighbor's lamp? No, it was definitely there, solid and motionless. Checking other cameras confirmed my suspicion. Cameras 13 and 14 couldn't capture it due to blocked angles, but camera 12 had a perfect view. I almost reached for my phone to snap a picture, but something held me back. For about 30 seconds I watched. Then the glow subtly shifted, tilting or rotating, but without a sound. If this had been machinery or a vehicle, I should have heard something even from a distance. In less than a blink, it vanished completely. No fade, no movement, just gone. I was still staring at the empty yard when the front gate camera suddenly showed activity. An unmarked van pulled up to the security office. No logos, no readable plates. This was unusual. We never get unannounced visitors, especially not at 2 a.m. 2 men emerged, both in stark black suits, white shirts, black ties. They didn't look like typica, truck drivers, or inspectors. The taller man had a narrow face and skin so pale it appeared almost grey under the security lights. His companion kept his head down, seemingly studying the ground. Neither smiled. When I buzzed the intercom and asked if I could help them, the tall man looked directly at the camera and spoke in a completely flat, emotionless voice. We need access to the southern loading bay. The southern loading bay was an abandoned section hidden behind newer expansions, completely absent from public maps. My typical night shift was quiet and routine until 2 men appeared at the security door. They were unnervingly still, waiting with an intensity that set me on edge. The shorter man spoke first, demanding access to the loading bay. His request was simple but felt wrong. When I said I needed to call my supervisor, the taller one claimed they'd already spoken to Dennis, a statement I knew was false. Dennis lived 2 towns away and would have warned me about any visitors. Something about these men was deeply unsettling. The shorter one stepped closer, and his eyes were unlike anything I'd seen before, flat and dark, not reflecting the security lights like normal eyes would. Every instinct screamed not to let them in, but they seemed like the type you didn't argue with. Before I could fully process what was happening, they turned and walked back to their van. No threats, no arguments, just a smooth, calculated retreat. The van pulled away without headlights, disappearing down the access road into complete darkness. I switched to the road cameras, but they never appeared on any footage. When Dennis arrived at 6 to take over my shift, I explained what happened. He looked at me like I was joking. No visitors were logged, and when we checked the gate camera feed, something was wrong. The recording for that time slot was completely gone, corrupted, the system claimed. Camera 12 was black for 4 minutes following the incident. I stopped talking about it after that. But late at night, in the empty lot, I can't help scanning that far corner, half expecting to see that strange, pulsing pale light again. Late winter afternoon, and the cold bit sharp enough to turn my breath into white clouds. Out here, 6 miles from town, nothing but open fields and a thin dirt road, with an occasional farm truck breaking the silence. I was perched about 20 feet up in the bucket, replacing a cracked insulator on a rural power line. My partner Dale was back in the truck, shuffling through inspection logs while I worked. The wind hummed through the wires, but then something changed. The sound shifted from wind to something else, a a steady, low hum like a distant refrigerator, except there was nothing around that could make such a noise. When I turned, I saw it hovering over the eastern fields, not high up, maybe a couple 100 feet, but hanging perfectly still, oval-shaped and dark against the pale sky, with a strange shimmer like summer heat rising from asphalt. No wings, no blades, no engine sounds, just that vibrating hum. As I reached for my radio, the hum instantly cut off. Dead silence. The object tilted slightly, then shot straight up, vanishing into the cloud cover. I was still staring at the empty sky when tires crunched on gravel below. A black SUV rolled to a stop right beneath my lift. No front plates. 2 men stepped out, identical in black suits, white shirts, and black ties. Same height, same build, like carbon copies of each other. The first one shaded his eyes and signaled me down. The second spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Sir, we need you to come down." It wasn't a request. As I lowered the bucket, the first man approached. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Up close, his skin was pale, almost grey, with features so smooth they seemed almost unreal. Dale and I were working on an electrical line out in the fields when the strange encounter happened. The day was cold, with wind cutting across the open landscape. I was focused on fixing an insulator when 2 men appeared. Their approach was unusual from the start. One of them spoke to me, asking if everything was working right. When I glanced over, I noticed the first man's face seemed odd. It didn't have normal lines or texture. Dale remained in the truck's cab, watching. The second man positioned himself to block my view of Dale. The first man's voice stayed calm but developed an edge as he pressed me. "If you saw something in the sky, it's important you tell us for your own safety." I responded that I didn't know what they were talking about. What struck me most was that neither man wore a coat. In 30-degree weather, they stood in thin suits, as if the cold meant nothing. Before I could process this, the first man stepped back toward their SUV, saying, "We appreciate your cooperation," like the conversation was already finished. They drove away smoothly, without kicking up any dust until they disappeared from sight. When I climbed into the truck and asked Dale about the encounter, he claimed he hadn't seen anyone. He insisted he'd heard a vehicle arrive, but saw nothing when he looked out. We finished the job in silence. During the drive back, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that SUV following us. Later that night, I considered calling someone, my boss or even the sheriff, but what would I say? 2 strange men told me not to discuss something I suppose I didn't see. Yet every time I closed my eyes, I could picture a dark shape hanging over the fields, accompanied by a persistent hum. This all happened after we'd been to my sister's place for dinner. It was a clear, cold night wide, stars looking sharp and the moon casting shadows across the road. Julie was driving, and I had the window cracked, enjoying the crisp air. We had just come off Route 19, maybe 10 minutes from home, when something passed across the moon, solid and perfectly circular. We were driving home late when something blocked the moonlight for a moment. Julie gripped the steering wheel tighter, her silence telling me she'd seen it too. The road felt more desolate than usual, though it was always quiet at night. By the time we reached our street, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing, maybe a plane catching the light or a bird flying close. But then we saw him. A black Lincoln sat at the entrance of our driveway. A man in a black suit and white shirt stood beside it, no coat despite the cold air. His breath hung visible in the night. He wasn't looking at us initially, just staring across the street toward the tree line. Julie slowed the car almost to a stop. When he turned, his movement was deliberate, like an actor hitting a precise mark. His face was pale and thin, with dark eyes that seemed to absorb all light. No facial hair, no glasses. As Julie rolled forward, he approached her window. Not quickly, but with a certainty that we wouldn't drive away. "You enjoy the show tonight?" he asked, his voice low and flat, completely at odds with his blank expression. Julie hesitated. "What show?" She finally responded, perhaps thinking he meant something local or ordinary. His mouth barely twitched into something almost like a smile. "The one you just saw," he said, as if correcting her, implying she'd already acknowledged something. My stomach churned. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat was dry. Julie remained silent, putting the car in park. Suddenly I realized the world had gone quiet. No crickets, no wind. Not exactly silent, but as if all other sounds had been pushed far away. For the first time, he looked directly at me. His gaze locked onto me, unmoving. I was driving back from my cousin Matt's place in Belefford, taking County Road 16 instead of the main highway. Late, just after 11 o'clock. I loved this road at night. Quiet, dark, with only occasional mailboxes breaking the blackness. The heat was low, windows slightly cracked, and wood smoke drifted through the air. My mind wandered lazily, half focused on soft music and the early morning ahead. Around 8 or 9 miles past town, something caught my eye. In the field to the left, a column of white light erupted from the ground, shooting straight up into the sky. This wasn't like any searchlight or flashlight beam I'd seen before. It was narrow, solid, impossibly bright, brighter than anything I'd ever witnessed. For maybe 3 seconds it stood perfectly still, then vanished completely. No afterglow, no smoke, no sound. I slowed down, staring through the driver's side window. Then I pulled over just past a gravel driveway and killed my headlights, half expecting the light to reappear. The field was now just black, with a faint outline of trees in the distance. Something felt off, like I was witnessing something I shouldn't. I sat there, debating whether to turn into the driveway for a closer look. This part of the county was nothing but farmland and old barns. No one would be out here this late. But an uneasy feeling stopped me. I kept going, my speed dropped to about 35, constantly checking the mirrors. The road behind me remained empty. The next morning, I went out early to get the paper. 2 sets of tire tracks marked the shoulder where that car had been parked, but no footprints disturbed the frost, not even our own from the night before. Julie pulled into the driveway fast. After parking in the garage, we just sat for a minute, both of us scanning the mirrors. The street was completely empty. A man had approached our car earlier, asked if we had any questions. When I involuntarily shook my head, he stepped back. He walked backwards to a black Lincoln, never turning around, moving with an unsettling precision until he reached the driver's side door. He slid in seamlessly, as if he knew exactly where everything was, without even glancing down. I was driving down County Road 16 when something strange caught my eye. Ahead of me, a black sedan sat motionless across both lanes, its tail lights low and wide. As I approached, I slowed to a crawl, maybe 10 miles an hour, and rolled forward until I was about 30 feet away. 2 men stood frozen in front of the car, one by each headlight. Dark suits, white shirts, no ties. They stared directly at me, not speaking, not moving. The man on the left raised his arm slowly, making a calm, deliberate turning motion with his hand. The other remained completely still. I rolled down my window halfway. "Is everything all right?" The words echoed in the cold air. No response. Just that same methodical hand gesture from the first man. Something felt off. No flashing lights, no debris, no signs of an accident. A chill ran down my spine. The men's symmetrical stance seemed staged, unnatural. My instincts screamed something was wrong. Without hesitation, I put the car in reverse and backed up, turning onto a side road I'd passed earlier. In my rearview mirror, they remained exactly as they were, motionless, watching. The side road wound through farmland, eventually rejoining County Road 16 about 4 miles ahead. When I returned to the original spot, nothing was there. No car, no men, just empty pavement under my headlights. I drove faster, nerves jangling, until I finally saw another vehicle at the county line. At home, I sat in the driveway, engine running, wrestling with weather, to report what I'd seen. But report what? 2 silent men in suits blocking the road? The next day, I retraced my route in daylight. The field where I'd seen a beam of light was just bare dirt and weeds. No tracks, no equipment, no evidence anything unusual had happened. I was hiking alone that evening, taking the fire road that loops around the ridge and back down into town. I'd started later than I meant to, and the sun was already low behind the hills. When I began heading back, the air had that heavy still feeling it gets right before it turns dark. You could hear every step of your boots on gravel. About halfway down the trail, I stopped to drink some water and happened to glance across the valley. Through the trees, way off in the distance, I caught this quick flash, silver, almost metallic, just a sliver of it between the branches. It wasn't sunlight hitting something because the sun was already dipping below the ridge. It was more like something reflective moved for a split second and then was gone. I stared for a good minute, waiting for it to reappear, but nothing moved. I shook it off and kept walking. The trail narrowed as it wound down the slope, and the light was fading faster than I liked. The only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves from the wind. But about 10 minutes later, I noticed something behind me. Low rolling tires on gravel. I turned and saw a black SUV creeping along the trail. It was odd because this fire road was usually gated off to vehicles, except for the occasional ranger truck. This wasn't a ranger truck. It was a big, shiny SUV. spotless despite the dusty road. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I slowed down, figuring they might just want to pass, but they stayed behind me, maybe 40 or 50 feet back, moving at my pace. I stepped to the side of the trail, giving a little wave for them to go ahead. The SUV slowed even more, but didn't pass. It just kept rolling forward as I started walking again. My phone had no service out there, so calling anyone wasn't an option. After another minute, the driver's side window rolled down halfway. There were two men inside, both wearing black suits, white shirts, and black ties. Out here on a dusty fire road in the middle of nowhere at dusk, neither of them looked like they belonged anywhere near a hiking trail. That night when I took the trash out, I noticed a car parked at the far end of the street. Black sedan, older model, no front plate. The windows were too tinted to see inside. When I came back out 10 minutes later, it was gone. Where the sedan had blocked the road, there were no skid marks or tire tracks leading into the ditch. It was like they'd never been there at all. I stepped onto the gravel parking area at the bottom of the trail, my nerves still buzzing from what just happened. The SUV rolled up next to me earlier on the ridge, two men inside who seemed more interested in watching than talking. Their questions were brief, their stares unnerving. My late-night talk radio show typically covers local mysteries, but I never expected to become part of one. It was just past midnight, the station silent except for equipment hums, when a caller broke the quiet. His voice was measured, almost flat, with an undercurrent of suppressed anxiety. The driver had been pale with short, dark hair. No pleasantries, just a direct question about whether I'd seen anything unusual up on the ridge. I'd said no, keeping the silver flash to myself. They'd tracked me down the entire trail, always just far enough ahead to be visible, but not quite confrontational. I need to describe something I saw, the caller said. I don't know who else to tell. His words mirrored my own unease from earlier that evening. At the trail's bottom, the SUV pulled aside. I walked past, feeling their eyes boring into me, and got into my car as quickly as possible. Checking the rearview mirror, I saw they remained parked. Then, just as I turned the final corner toward town, they unexpectedly headed back up the trail. The entire descent had been eerily silent. No birds, no wind, just my footsteps and the soft tire sounds behind me. Every trail turn, they were there. Close enough to track me, distant enough to remain slightly menacing. I haven't returned to that ridge since. Something about the encounter felt wrong, unfinished. And now, with this mysterious caller about to share his story, I wondered if our experiences might be connected. When he first called, his voice trembled as he described the scene. An unidentified disc-shaped object hovered above a clearing near an old quarry about 20 meters out of town. He started with the lights. Soft white circles rotating slowly, nothing like aircraft blinking patterns. His description grew more intense as he explained the object's movement. At first, it barely shifted, then accelerated in impossible ways that defied logical explanation. Shadows on the ground caught his attention, strange reflections of surrounding trees that moved faster than any normal reflection could. I listened carefully, scribbling notes and trying to hide my skepticism. He insisted the entire encounter lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then suddenly, without warning or sound, the object vanished. When he returned to his car, the gravel at the clearing's edge looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. After hanging up, I remained at the microphone, reviewing the recording and my notes. An unsettling sensation of being watched crept over me despite the empty station. I rationalized the feeling as a result of late-night exhaustion and overactive imagination. The next morning's routine begged, and normally, coffee, message check, backup of previous night's recordings, but something felt off from the moment I entered the lobby. Two men in identical black suits were waiting. They didn't look like they belonged, standing stiffly and asking for me by name. "We need the recording from last night," one said in a mechanical, rehearsed tone, "for archiving purposes." Confused, I led them to the back office. I pulled up the computer, expecting to find the file. Nothing. I double-checked timestamps, searched the trash, ran comprehensive searches. The recording had vanished completely. The men watched silently as I grew increasingly anxious. The taller one leaned forward, his gaze intense and unreadable. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. The encounter had lasted barely 7 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When they left, I closed my laptop, their precise movements and unnervingly calm demeanor still etched in my mind. No arguments, no demands, just a polite exchange and business cards left behind. Something was wrong. I could feel it. That evening, I returned to the station, hoping to review the backup drive from home. My apartment seemed colder, shadows longer. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see someone in a black suit watching, but there was nothing. When I plugged in the drive and started scrolling through files, a chill ran down my spine. The recording was gone. No audio, no empty file, nothing to suggest it had ever existed. I checked the cloud backup, still nothing. Over the next few days, normalcy became a fragile illusion. Every laptop open, every door knock, every tire hiss brought a surge of unease. I gave vague answers to friends about late-night shows, mumbling about technical issues. Strange occurrences began to pile up. Neighbors mentioned a black sedan parked across the street that would vanish when I looked. Kitchen. Lights flickered when I was alone. My phone would ring with no caller ID, answering only to static. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the server had been hacked. Perhaps I'd misfiled the recording. I even asked the overnight engineer if he'd touched anything, but he swore he hadn't. Those men weren't ordinary corporate auditors or local officials. Their interest in a single audio file was far beyond what should matter, and their appearance, they didn't look like anyone I'd ever met before. Part of me wanted to believe it was a technical glitch, but another part knew something much deeper was happening. I worked at the radio station, handling daily tasks like scheduling interviews and preparing music segments. But something kept nagging at me, two men in black who had visited, their calm and deliberate presence lingering in my mind. My behavior started changing. I locked my office door even during the day and obsessively checked backups, searching for any trace of the missing recording or the caller's voice. A week later, an unsettling call came to my personal phone, no number, just silence. I didn't answer. That night, a car briefly idled outside my apartment. When I peeked through the blinds, it was empty. I couldn't be sure if anyone had been there at all. Cautiously, I shared fragments of the story with colleagues, careful not to sound crazy. Most dismissed it as a prank or coincidence, but I knew something deeper was happening. The missing recording, the strange call, those men, they were connected. I was certain. Months passed. The station shuffled equipment around, and I adjusted my routine, trying to convince myself nothing unusual was occurring. Yet strange things persisted. The phone would sometimes ring with silence, and a black sedan would occasionally drift slowly past my street. I never saw those two men again, but their image remained IV, calm, patient, measuring me with their gaze. Questions haunted me. Was the caller's story real or an elaborate setup? The audio was gone forever, and I realized some mysteries might never be resolved. On quiet nights, my mind would drift to that call, to the lights over the quarry, to shadows moving in impossible ways. Some experiences defy explanation, and maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how they're meant to be. My story began on a mid-August midnight, driving to the state park's edge with my camera. I'd been casually exploring astrophotography for a couple of years. The Perseid meteor shower was peaking, and I knew this spot offered perfect unpolluted viewing. At the end of a dirt access road, I parked, carried my tripod about 50 yards into an open clearing, and prepared to capture the night sky. The night was calm, with crickets chirping steadily and the sky completely clear. My intervalometer was capturing 30-second exposures, one after another. The initial shots showed some nice meteor streaks, nothing out of the ordinary. But about an hour in, while reviewing the images, something caught my eye. What I first dismissed as lens flare was a small round light near the top of one frame. Glowing faintly, it seemed unremarkable until I checked the next shot. 30 seconds later, the light had moved, not streaked or blurred like a meteor, but shifted slightly, as if a star had inched across the sky over hours. Except this happened in mere moments. As I continued scrolling, the light's behavior grew stranger. It would jump position, then pause for 2 or 3 exposures before moving again. Sometimes it appeared dim, then suddenly brighter, almost pulsing. Most peculiar was its movement, opposite the direction of the meteor trails. While everything else flowed one way across the sky, this light traveled differently. I hadn't noticed it during shooting. Only in the captured images. I tried to rationalize it as a tumbling satellite, but I'd never seen anything move quite like this before. I let the camera continue for another hour, but the light vanished from the frames. Back home, I imported the photos into Lightroom. Cropping and zooming revealed more details. The light wasn't perfectly round, but more like a flattened sphere. It appeared metallic, with a faint halo. The pulsing effect was distinct, dimming and brightening in a pattern unlike any camera artifact I'd encountered. 2 days passed without me sharing the images online. I planned to edit the full sequence first. On the third morning, a black sedan with heavily tinted windows appeared across the street. I assumed it was a visitor for a neighbor. An hour later, checking my mail, I noticed the driver's door open. A man in a black suit, white shirt, and black tie emerged. No sunglasses. His eyes locked onto me as he approached. Standing just feet away, he spoke in a completely flat tone. "Are you willing to delete the last hour of exposures from August 12th? Thursday night in early spring was quiet. My parents were out, Mom at her book club, Dad working the evening shift at the mill. Alone in my room, I half listened to music while playing with the ham radio I'd bought secondhand from Larry at the county flea market. Over the past year, I've been slowly learning its workings. Normally, I'd catch local chatter, truckers, hobbyists, weather reports. But this night was different. Suddenly, I landed on something entirely unfamiliar. A voice speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Short, clipped words came through, almost rhythmic, like someone reading from a coded document. I grabbed my notebook and scribbled down how the syllables sounded. Then silence. Just as I was about to switch frequencies, another voice emerged, slower, deeper. It read S, sequence of numbers 43.819122.475. Coordinates, perhaps, though I didn't investigate immediately. Days later, something strange happened. A man appeared, delivering a cryptic message about deleting something. When I asked who he was, he repeated the same sentence robotically, ignoring my question. After an uncomfortable silence where he simply stared, he returned to a sedan with no front license plate and drove away. Later, reviewing my doorbell camera footage, I noticed something odd. The video froze for exactly 30 seconds while he stood before me, with audio continuing but the image stuck on a single frame. When it resumed, he was already halfway to his car. Investigating further, I discovered the last 15 shots of the sequence with the pulsing object were corrupted, appearing as black squares with file cannot be opened errors. The earlier frames remained intact, but I never saw that car again. The day after school, I put the numbers into Google Maps. They pointed to a patch of woods about 20 m south of town near Devil's Hollow, a place I'd driven past with my dad before. Just farmland and tree lines, nothing special. I wrote the numbers down under the words I'd copied, but the frequency went dead after I flipped through every channel. I didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't like I thought I'd discovered something huge, just weird. I kept the notebook in my desk drawer and figured that was that. The next afternoon, right after getting home from school, 2 men stood on the porch. Both wore black suits with white shirts and black ties, no logos or badges. One was tall and thin with pale skin and a sharp jawline. The other was shorter, heavier, with dark hair combed straight back. They didn't smile. The tall one said my name like he was confirming it. "You have a radio set in your room?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah," I said. "We'd like to see your radio logs." He stated flatly, as if it was a given. I didn't move right away and asked who they were with. The shorter one reached into his coat pocket. For a second I thought he'd show an ID, but he pulled out a small black notebook and flipped it open. I couldn't see what was inside from the doorway. "You picked up a transmission yesterday. We need to verify your records," he said. I told them I didn't think I had to give them anything without my parents home. The tall one looked at the other, then back at me. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "We just need to make sure it's logged correctly. It's for your safety." I remember those exact words, "for your safety." They didn't fit the way he said them. I suggested I could take their information and have my dad call them. They glanced at each other again, and the shorter one closed his notebook. "We'll be back," he said. They turned and walked down the driveway toward a black sedan parked at the curb. I watched from the window as they got in. The car didn't have plates. That night, I checked my notebook. The page with the strange words and numbers was gone. Not torn out. Gone like it had never been there. All the other pages were intact, my handwriting exactly where I'd left it. Just that one entry missing. I hadn't used the radio since the day it mysteriously turned on by itself. While doing homework on my bed, it clicked on, static filling the room before a deep voice emerged, reciting numbers 43.819122.475. That night, I dreamed of walking through bare winter trees, soft ground beneath my feet like wet sand. Disembodied voices whispered ahead, but no one was visible. When I woke up, the radio was hissing static again, even though the power switch was off. I unplugged it and shoved it in the closet. A few nights later, returning home after dark, I spotted a familiar black sedan parked 2 houses down. The tall man from Biffy sat motionless in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. As I passed, I pretended to check my phone in my driveway. When I looked up moments later, the car had vanished. My wife Aaron and I had escaped to the desert for a long weekend, a couple hours outside of Moab. We'd been seeking more isolated trips, just us, a tent, and no cell service. After driving 30 minutes down a winding dirt road, we found a flat, open area about a quarter mile from a low ridge. The weather was ideal. Warm days, clear nights, dropping into the low 50s, and a sky bursting with stars. On our second night, we sat quietly by the fire after dinner. Moonless sky was pitch black, stars so bright they seemed touchable. A faint wind and occasional brush rustling were our only sounds. Suddenly, I noticed something unusual over the ridge. A car-sized sphere of soft orange-white light. It hovered low, maybe 30 feet above the ground, moving with an unnatural, deliberate motion. Unlike a drone or plane, it weaved slowly, as if searching. We watched for a full minute before Aaron asked if I was seeing the same thing. We were sitting quietly when it happened. This light, just hung there, completely silent. No sound at all. Suddenly, it shifted position, zipping 20 or 30 feet to the side faster than my brain could process. Then it hovered again before shooting straight up, almost disappearing against the starry sky. We didn't speak for a long time after it vanished. Sleep was restless that night, with me waking up repeatedly, thinking I saw faint glows around the tent. The next morning, we packed up and started driving back toward the highway on a narrow dirt road. Ahead, a black sedan was parked, blocking most of the path. The car looked brand new, spotlessly clean despite the dusty surroundings. 2 men stood beside the vehicle, wearing identical black suits, white shirts, second black ties. Their posture was rigid, hands clasped precisely in front of them. They stood without sunglasses, facing directly into the harsh sunlight. As we pulled up, one approached my window. His skin was pale, not sickly but almost colorless. In a flat, emotionless voice, he said, "We'll need your cameras." I responded that we hadn't taken any pictures, which was technically true. Aaron confirmed the same from the passenger seat. The man stared at me, then repeated his demand. His partner remained completely motionless and silent throughout the entire interaction. After a moment, he stepped back and said, "You can go." They walked back to their sedan in perfect synchronization, got inside without another word, and pulled just enough to one side for us to pass. When I checked the rearview mirror moments later, the road behind us was empty, nothing but open desert stretching back to the distant ridge. We didn't discuss what happened, but I can't shake the unsettling way they demanded our cameras, as if they already knew exactly what we'd witnessed. Last October, I was hiking the coastal trails of Bar Harbor under perfect weather conditions. The air had that crisp feeling that signals winter's approach, cool but sunny. I'd been out all morning with my camera, capturing the rugged coastline and the old Bass Harbor Head lighthouse. Photography isn't my profession, but I enjoy experimenting with shots when the light is just right. The low tide gave me a chance to climb down onto the rocks beneath the lighthouse, searching for unique perspectives. A few bird watchers were scattered up the trail, and a distant fishing boat broke the otherwise quiet landscape. For about an hour, I wandered between tide pools, photographing the waves. At one point, something caught my eye in the viewfinder, a shiny object high above the tree line. It appeared briefly, maybe a second or two, before vanishing. I dismissed it as sunlight glinting off a plane or a seagull. By mid-afternoon, I returned to the gravel parking lot, planning to head into town for dinner and review my day's photographs. But as I emerged from the trail, 2 men in black suits and vintage hats stood near my car. They looked like they'd stepped out of the 1950s. Initially, I thought they might be part of a historical reenactment or film project. However, when they turned toward me in perfect synchronization, something felt off. "Where did you have your negatives developed?" one asked with unsettling calm. Confused, I explained I was using a digital camera. Their lack of reaction was strange. They repeated the question identically, standing completely motionless. No shifting, no blinking. I showed them my camera, but one stepped closer in an eerily deliberate manner. He asked if I'd reviewed the exposures. When I said no, they both nodded simultaneously and stepped back. I turned around to put my stuff in the car, and when I looked back maybe 5 seconds later, they were gone. No vehicle, no sound, nothing. One of them had told me to take care driving home, and they had both walked down the gravel drive toward the main road just moments before. When I loaded the pictures onto my laptop at my rental, something caught my eye. In one of the lighthouse shots, right between the tower and the tree line, there was a metallic object, perfectly round, like a ball bearing. It was too sharp to be a bird and didn't look like a drone. The light hit it in a way that made it almost glow. The next morning, when I tried to show a friend back home, the file wouldn't open. All my other photos from that day were fine, but this one shot with the mysterious object was completely corrupted. It was a little after 9 on a Thursday night, and I was the only one left in the weather service starty. On. Night shifts can be pretty lonely, especially on radar duty. I'd been tracking a line of thunderstorms moving in from the west. Nothing severe, just the typical summer storms that roll in slow and light up the sky. My monitors showed the live radar sweep and satellite imagery, everything looking normal until something strange caught my eye. A return that didn't match the rest of the data. It was small, maybe the size of a compact car, and wasn't following the wind patterns. This thing zipped through the storm's leading edge, slowed down, then cut sharply north like it had made a deliberate decision. I initially thought it might be a military drone, but the speed changes didn't make sense. At one point, it was moving over 200 knots, then nearly stopped for about 3 seconds before darting off again. What struck me most was the complete lack of a transponder signal. Every aircraft I'd ever tracked had some kind of identifier. Out of habit and curiosity, I screen captured the sequence. When I zoomed in on one frame where it passed beneath the densest part of the cloud line, I noticed a faint halo around it. It seemed lit from within, but the light didn't scatter like lightning. I saved everything in our shared archive under a nondescript file name and made a note in the log for the next shift. 2 men in black suits were waiting in the lobby before I'd even had my morning coffee. They looked like they'd stepped out of an old photograph. No badges, no weather service IDs. The tall, thin one did all the talking, his smile polite but not reaching his eyes. He asked if I was monitoring Sector 3B the night before. I mumbled, yes, while still half asleep. The data you collected has been reclassified. We'll need access to your workstation, he said. Following protocol, I asked who they were. He just repeated, the data has been reclassified. His shorter companion, Nee, Ver, looked directly at me, instead scanning the room like he was taking a mental inventory. Stunned, I logged in and stepped back while the tall man navigated straight to my saved folder. No searching, no hesitation. He deleted the files, emptied the recycle bin, and then did the same to the backup drive. Only after they left without a word did I realize they hadn't asked for my password. They already knew it. I checked with my supervisor, thinking someone higher up must have sent them, but he was clueless. No visitors had been signed in. No review of radar logs was scheduled. When I tried pulling the files from the server, I discovered something impossible. Our system keeps 3 redundant backups in separate locations. Deleting something completely requires multiple steps and permissions. Yet all 3 file versions were gone. Not corrupted, not hidden, simply erased. That afternoon, I returned to the radar station. My note about the anomaly had vanished, though the rest of the log remained untouched. No edits, no signs anyone had accessed it. Driving home through heavier rain than forecast, I spotted a black sedan parked down the street. No front plates, windows too dark to see inside. I watched from my truck, but it never moved. By morning, it had disappeared. A week later, I was called in for another overnight shift. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head. The old airfield was half park, half forgotten runway, with tall grass and a sagging chain-link fence. A couple of maintenance hangars leaked the smell of oil and dust. I go there when I want open sky and no neighbors complaining about prop noise. That evening, the thermals were good and the light was sharp. I launched the drone from the grassy berm just as the sun was dropping, trying to catch the last rays on the control tower for a time-lapse. Something felt off immediately. The birds were hissing, no swallows skimming over the grass at dusk. The air was unnaturally quiet, like someone had turned down the volume on the entire place. No insects either. I shrugged it off and sent the drone up, watching the live feed on my tablet. I'd been flying long enough to trust the machine's movements. A little after golden hour, something crossed the horizon on the north side of the field. At first, it looked like a lens flare, bright and round, but then it moved. It cut across the frame, low over the hangars, then slid into the gathering cloud bank. The drone captured its impossible movement, a blink of speed and then a full stop right at the cloud base. No sound came through the tablet, no echo from the field. Then, as if reality had been fast-forwarded, it vanished inside the cloud too quickly for the eye to follow. I hit record out of reflex. I always record everything. On playback, the object was a hard-edged disc, not a smear. It hit the cloud bank, and the pixels bloomed around it for a frame like heat haze, then disappeared. The timestamp showed a clean 1-second gap where the object should have been, with the cloud moving identically before and after. Halfway through that night, I caught another radar blip. Same size, same movement, same strange pauses. Before I could save it, the signal blinked out, not faded, just disappeared mid-scan. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. When I answered, silence greeted me. A faint electrical hum filled the line. Then a flat voice spoke. "You won't find it again." The line went dead. I noticed a sedan at the far end of my street, idling oddly when I pulled into the driveway. No plates, windows too dark to see through. It sat there a beat longer than it should have, then rolled away. That was the kind of thing I'd usually ignore. Earlier, I'd been up late reviewing footage from the SD card on my laptop in the car. Something about that second was off. I uploaded a copy to my external drive and tucked the original card in my pocket, planning to show some storm shooting friends later. I wanted someone to confirm I wasn't seeing things or just exhausted. Sleep didn't come easily. That blank white space where the object entered the cloud kept replaying in my mind. The next day passed normally with me checking emails a few times, but the car stayed in my thoughts. An unknown number pinged my phone that evening, going silent the moment I answered. 2 days later, just after lunch, a knock at the door startled me. Through the peephole, 2 men stood waiting. Black suits, shoes polished to a shine that suggested they were used to being stopped and questioned. They didn't look threatening. If anything, they seemed practiced at revealing nothing. Curiosity overrode my caution, and I let them in. Their introduction was soft, almost as if giving me a choice. One held out a blank card. I waved it away. The taller man's question came direct and chilling. "Where's the SD card from your flight last evening?" His tone made my mouth go dry. When I said I had backups and could provide copies, they listened. The taller man nodded, accepting my response without surprise. "We'll need the card," he repeated, mentioning chain of custody. Language I'd only heard in crime shows. People who want data usually request files. But they were asking for the physical card, and their approach carried its own subtle pressure. I'd been talking to a friend in airport operations, and something about their words unsettled me. The conversation felt too precise to be a random encounter. We stood in my cramped hallway, exchanging cautious observations. I offered to copy the file right there on my laptop. The 2 men remained standing, their postures tense. One, with a lightly rumpled sleeve, kept his hands clasped as if touching anything might disrupt the delicate situation. "Digital copies can be altered," he said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that brooked no argument. His companion stared absently at the ceiling fan. When I handed over the card, it seemed to carry an unusual weight. He accepted it with both hands, almost reverently, examined the corner label, and carefully placed it in a small, padded envelope. Their actions bore a clinical, corporate efficiency, no threats, no conversation, just pure focus. Before departing, the taller man delivered a measured warning. "We appreciate your cooperation. Don't post anything until we contact you again." I attempted to probe their origins. FAA, police, a university perhaps, but they dodged the question. "Investigation," he said cryptically. "We'll be in touch." Their exit was as mysterious as their arrival. No car waited outside. No footsteps disturbed the yard. After the door closed, I thought I heard a vehicle's distant hum, though it could have been the refrigerator or the kettle starting in the kitchen. I called Mara, who works at a local paper. She offered to check the footage for anomalies and asked about the file. Learning I'd surrendered the card, she seemed simultaneously frustrated and unsurprised. "People like that don't just say investigation and leave polite envelopes," she remarked. "They have protocols." The following evening, local news ran a brief segment about pilots reporting an unusual drone near the airfield. The report revealed nothing about discs or missing frames, merely quoting an airfield ops source stating the issue was resolved. Watching the segment twice, I felt a strange discomfort seeing the familiar fence section where I'd been now looking utterly mundane. A week passed. No phone call, no email, no official correspondence arrived. I found Mem Diane, myself repeatedly checking the envelope, its unsealed flap holding an unspoken mystery. I walked through the fence at the old municipal airfield just after sunrise. a place that felt like the only quiet spot left in town. The taxiways were overtaken by weeds, and the tower stood half collapsed while river gusts rolled across the tarmac in long, lazy waves. For years, I've been coming here to capture how light interacts with rust and concrete, but this morning the sky was a low, clean grey, and the air carried the taste of river. I had my drone with me, ready to fly. The battery was cool, sitting quietly in its bag on the shelf. Later that night, after the flight, I would find myself at my table until 2 a.m. Kitchen light on, tablet beside me. The footage would reveal something unusual. When I opened the backup file, the timeline jumped unexpectedly. A black frame appeared where the object had entered the cloud, and then the cloud shifted slightly in the next frame. The encoding showed no errors, just a clean cut that seemed intentional. Thoughts raced through my mind, going to the station, posting the clip online, wondering about the smallness of my usually explainable life. A car had been waiting on my street, different make but same quiet presence. The card I'd been given was now gone, sealed with tape, opened, then taped again. 2 weeks after that strange encounter, a man in a plain suit left an anonymous envelope on my porch. Inside was a single printout, a tightly cropped still from my footage. The disc filled the page like a coin, printed on high-quality paper, not from my printer. The back simply read, "Please exercise discretion." I taped the print inside my storage cabinet, among propellers and spare batteries. Now, when I stand on the berm at dusk, something feels different. The birds haven't returned to the airfield quite the same way. I still fly sometimes, but now I always save recordings to 2 cards and 1 drive, keeping a separate physical copy just in case. I don't know what they are. I don't know what handing over the card meant, whether it calmed something or started something new. All I know is that looking at the clouds has become a stranger experience. Pete, the old airfield seemed frozen in time, its colors dulled by age and neglect. Metal gleamed subtly under the overcast sky as I made my way toward the distant maintenance hangars. An easy-to-spot gate marked my entry point, wrapped in faded orange tape and an ancient no trespassing sign. The runway stretched out before me, once a smooth expanse, now fractured with stubborn grass pushing through its seams. No signs of life interrupted the stillness. No workers, no vehicles, just me and the occasional wildlife that called this forgotten place home. Halfway down the 3rd taxiway, something caught my eye. An aircraft sat just beyond the hangar line, looking almost placed there by an invisible hand. Its parking lights seemed to be the only indication. It wasn't just another abandoned piece of equipment. From a distance, it wasn't remarkable. A matte, dark-skinned craft with an unusual profile. The aircraft defied easy classification. Its silhouette suggested a light twin, but the details were off. Wings swept differently than any model I recognized. Tail surfaces unique in a way I couldn't immediately place. What struck me most was the absolute silence surrounding it. No engine sounds, no mechanical whispers, nothing to suggest recent activity. As I moved closer, my camera ready, a sudden explosion of starlings burst from the weeds beneath my feet. Their flight was abrupt, and then something strange. The bird sounds vanished completely, as if someone had flipped a switch on the world's ambient noise. The silence felt deliberate, most tangible. 60 yards out, I noticed something odd about the concrete beneath the aircraft. A slightly darker patch, like a spill that had been hastily cleaned, with a faint ring of dust marking where something heavy had rested. The plane sat there, utterly motionless, defying every expectation of what an aircraft should be. No whisper of a motor, no hint of recent movement, just silence, stretching out across the abandoned airfield like a thick, unbroken blanket. The plane sat quietly, looking like it had been there for more than just a few minutes. As I took a couple of shots, the camera preview showed a body with an almost too perfect matte skin. The battery icon blinked down, signaling its gradual drain. Walking around to capture a profile, a sudden awareness washed over me. I wasn't alone. 2 men materialized from behind Hangar C, their appearance identical. Black suits, narrow ties, short-cropped hair, and shoes polished to an unnatural gleam. They stood about 10 paces away, having approached without a sound, as if they'd simply appeared through a parted curtain. One tilted his head, scanning the sky while the other studied the aircraft. Their movements were deliberate and controlled, the hallmark of those accustomed to being watched. Slow, economical, never rushed. "You're not supposed to be here," the taller one said, a polite euphemism for trespassing. In that moment, I tried to categorize them. Landowner, law enforcement, or private security. No badges, no identification, just immaculate suits and a measured speech pattern that was neither threatening nor welcoming. "I know," I responded, "just shooting photos. I come here often." The shorter man's quick glance assessed my camera strap. "It landed," he stated, not asked. My hesitant maybe was cut short by his interruption. "This area is under quarantine." The claim seemed absurd. No hazardous material signs, no containment vehicles. Nothing suggested danger or contamination. The taller man folded his hands, offering a smile that suggested reasonable compliance with an unreasonable demand. "For everyone's safety, you'll leave the site. We'll need your cooperation." Strangely, they didn't request my photographs or ask me to delete anything. This omission felt calculated, as if the implied threat was meant to do the work without explicit confrontation. I reached for my phone, processing the surreal encounter. My phone was dead silent when I reached for it. The dial toner held breath. I drove home slowly, mirrors catching an angle of the field. The plane still sat there, but from the road it looked smaller, less present, like it had retreated into the airfield. I spent the afternoon analyzing what I'd seen. Uploading the card to my laptop, I copied the raw files and zoomed in on the frames. Rivets, faded paint strokes, and small smudges populated the expected details. The frame where I'd walked around the nose revealed a reflective glint and a strip where pixels looked squished like a frame drop. No sound recorded beyond the mic's usual, muffled wind. I called the county office to inquire about any restrictions on the old field. The land management woman paused, seemingly searching a map, then stated, "Nothing listed. No notices, no quarantine. The airfield's been default county property for years." This didn't mean much. Governments often leave strange gaps on maps. But over the next 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about the men who appeared and how they didn't demand my photos or equipment. They simply told me to leave. A crop duster pilot friend visited, and we returned to the runway at dusk. My curiosity and his speculation centered on whether they might be testing a new registry. Earlier, when the screen came alive, the reception bar's D vanished. The usual 4G icon replaced by a small dash. The camera's battery meter flickered and steadied on the LCD as if touched by external circuits. The shorter man had repeated, "Out." I'd assured them I wanted no trouble and started back, boots crunching on broken glass. Careful not to run or reach for another shot, I kept my eyes on the aircraft. The men watched every step until I crossed the wire fence and padded under the sagging gate. By the time I reached the small bridge over the drainage ditch, the suits had disappeared. No car, no footprints, no sign they'd ever been anywhere but in my mind. Logic overrode caution. Half a mile out, we parked in the scrub and watched. The plane had vanished, leaving only a darker, irregular oval on the concrete where it once sat. Walking closer, my friend rapped his knuckles on the spot like testing a car door. Nothing remained, no wheel marks scarred the dirt, no dragged tire tracks through the grass, just an empty space that had recently held something substantial. Back at the truck, my friend pressed me about filing a report. I admitted I didn't know where or to whom. When he asked if the suited men had requested the footage, I said they hadn't. He gave me that look, friends, reserved for scenarios that seemed frustratingly straightforward. Make copies, he advised. Keep them somewhere else. Store them in the cloud. I agreed, but an uneasy thought crept in. If my phone lost signal the day I tucked the card in my pocket, whatever caused that might return. That night, a white rectangular note appeared under my windshield wiper. Neatly printed text read, "Area under quarantine, do not return." No agency, no contact number. I photographed the paper before discarding it, but when I tried viewing the image, the file appeared corrupted. Since then, I haven't returned. Dreams still replay the moment the sky went silent, where birds took flight. I can't shake memories of those suited men, how casually they uttered quarantine, as if it were routine. An old drive hidden in a filing cabinet's depths held my backup photos. Partly because I couldn't discard them, partly heeding warnings about online records vanishing. This morning, I checked the drive. The folders remained, but the plane sequence was a frame shorter, as if time itself had inhaled and exhaled differently. Asked what I'd do differently? I'm uncertain. I'd like to believe I'd investigate further, or contact authorities. But the men were polite, their demeanor correct. The location's oppressive silence felt more prohibitive than any explicit warning. For now, I convince myself I'm fortunate to have left without confrontation. Telling myself not to return is essentially the same thing. It was late July, A dry, scorching day, when the cornfield ceased being a cornfield. I was descending the ridge, watching the landscape transform. The highway stretched out before me, a long ribbon cutting through endless Indiana farmland. I'd been driving since before dawn, my truck loaded with feed, wheels turning west. Hours of watching fields had become a blur of monotony, rows of crops, distant tractors, dust rising from passing cars. Then something caught my eye. Maybe a half-mile off the shoulder, hovering above the cornstalks, sat a triangle-shaped object, flat on the bottom like an upturned wedge, its points dotted with small dim lights. It hung about 40 or 50 feet up, low enough to make the corn tops bend beneath its shadow. Silence surrounded me. No mechanical hum, no whirring of props, just the familiar background noise of insects and road. Its movement was unlike anything mechanical I knew. The object rolled slowly as if scanning the field with an eerily deliberate motion. It would tilt, drift a few yards, then stop completely. I led into an old farm turnout and killed the engine. Something felt off. I wanted to be certain I could hear everything around me. The truck settled, and the radio faded. The air grew heavy, compressed, as if the world had been squeezed flat. A flock of starlings that had been scattered across the field moments before had vanished without a trace. I scanned the tree line and sky, half expecting a crop duster or some mundane explanation. Nothing, just the triangular silhouette against bruised clouds. Almost instinctively, I grabbed my phone and hit record. The battery was full. Initially, the camera showed the distant shape just like any other video I'd taken. Then something strange happened. The screen fuzzed, not like poor cell reception, but as if the image and reality were suddenly misaligned. With my own eyes, I could see the object clearly, but the phone's view momentarily went black, like someone had briefly covered the lens. When the image returned, the triangle had shifted slightly. The video file seemed normal, but that single second of movement didn't look like any technical glitch. I knew something unusual was happening. I stood watching until the light faded, and the object eased up, disappearing into the low clouds, a small dark shape swallowed by grey. Feeling slightly ridiculous, but compelled nonetheless, I radioed my dispatcher. Something odd at mile marker 52 over the Briggs farm, I reported. The highway was empty and the cab was cool, lane lights rattling past. My reply was a clipped, neutral thing, meant to stop conversation. Copy. Keep rolling. Time for decisions is short. I sat there until the stars blurred, wrestling with two impulses. One was to drive on, putting distance between myself and whatever had just happened. The other was to investigate, to get down in the cornfield and search for what might be missing. The first urge came from professional habit, a driver's instinct to keep moving. The second I forced myself to ignore. At a small interstate truck plaza with a blue-roof diner known for good pie, I planned to stop for coffee and a stretch. Maybe food or rest would shake off the strange tension the sky had left me with. As I pulled into my usual parking row, something caught my eye. Two men in black stood near the propane tanks, positioned with an unnatural precision. Dark suits, narrow ties, shiny shoes. They looked like characters from a mysterious movie scene. Their gaze swept the lot, tracking traffic, tracking me. I moved casually, heading to the restroom as if nothing were out of the ordinary. When I returned, they remained in place. A woman in a reflective vest filled her water jug, unnoticed by them. The cashier's eyes darted between the door and the register. I could feel their attention not through movement, but through an intense fixed stare that seemed to pin me in place. They didn't enter the store, didn't buy anything. Just stood watching, their presence creating an uncomfortable pressure. An irrational urge grew in me to flee, to back up and drive away. Staying felt like giving them an opportunity, though the thought seemed absurd even as it formed. Sometimes I thought I could still see something, a crooked, hard-to-place outline on the horizon. But it might just have been memory playing tricks, blurring the lines between what was real and what I imagined. There was a subtle shift in the air, a feeling creeping up like those moments when sleep starts to overtake you. I walked over, stretching casually, fingers sliding under my shirt. One of them moved ever so slightly, not approaching, just a tiny adjustment that aligned his shoulder with mine. Then I noticed identical faces, same jawline, same eyes, same expressionless mouth. They were focused intently as if the dumb chewer, as if the dumb tently, as if the dumb tently, as if the Gaia parking lot was some kind of stage. No cashier emerged, no security appeared. Drivers continued their routines, completely unaware. I tried the universal driver's gesture, a polite smile meant to smooth over potential tension. Nothing. They didn't smile back, they barely blinked. Classic Men in Black at a rest stop, the kind of scenario people joke about during late-night conspiracy conversations. The dispatcher's voice echoed in my memory. Keep rolling. I had no real sense of how to process what was happening. Later that night, my friend Luis would call me brave when I showed him the video. I might not have shared it if I'd first noticed the odd jump in the footage, right where an object crossed the frame, as if someone had deliberately spliced in a different cloud segment. The audio was strange too. A brief, high-pitched static, like a recorded squeal, then silence. Luis leaned back and said, "Keep your ears open," meaning stay alert, don't do anything reckless. During those strange minutes, I bought a pie, setting it on the passenger seat out of habit. When I returned, the two men remained exactly as before, motionless like part of the landscape. The sun had dropped lower. I started the truck and pulled out. They watched me leave. No waves, no approach, just watching. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence, just men in suits parked for official business. But an hour later, at another rest area, I spotted a sedan under a distant light. No one around. Driver's door closed. License plate pristine. I was on the roof because the roof is the only place in my block that still has darkness enough to see anything beyond the sodium street lamps. My name's Marco Reyes. I'm not an astronomer, just someone who likes to point expensive glass at empty bits of sky and try to make sense of the small things moving up there. I'd set the telescope up between the rusting HVAC units and a dying potted palm tripod feet on the gravel, red headlamp tucked into my jacket so I wouldn't wreck my night vision. The night was the kind of cold that sharpens edges. Late October, clear with a thin crescent moon. I was logging the Cassiopeia sweep when my planet tracking app pinged a satellite pass. I always check satellites. They move like they're on rails. This didn't. At first I saw 4 points of light evenly spaced, crawling across the sky as if someone had snapped a line of LEDs into place. They held formation perfectly. No drift, no jitter, just that quiet mechanical glide. Then they did something that made me sit back from the eyepiece because it made no sense in any of the little rhythms I knew. The formation split, not like anything I'd seen before. Later that day, I could have sworn I saw someone in a dark suit sitting perfectly still on the passenger side, staring forward. I haven't said anything to my company about the craft or the men. I filed a short note in my log, saw unknown object over Briggs Farm. Photo saved. That's where it sits. It reads small, like a man who was trying to make a brush mark in a ledger and not a confession on a blog. At home that night, my daughter asked why I smelled like diesel and pie. She wanted to know about the sky looking orange on the way in. I said the usual, the highway, heat, a long day. We ate and watched cartoons and I put the phone away. I don't know who the men were or why they didn't buy anything, or why one of them had a tie that didn't move in the breeze. I don't know whether whatever was over the Briggs farm was watching something or looking for something, or whether I'd been the only human who happened to notice. All I know is that when the lot was full of drivers, coffee to go, diesel fumes, the little clutter and noise of people running short errands, two men in black stood at the sty edge and did nothing but watch. I kept rolling. The pay is good for the miles, and the miles are my business. If it is anything else, it hasn't told me yet. I watched the lights move with an odd, clean choreography that defied everything I understood about motion. For 3 minutes they'd push in, snap apart, slide sideways without the faintest arc, vanish for a blink, and reappear a fraction of a degree away. No sound at all. The air on the roof remained ordinary, traffic down the avenue, a distant dog bark, a far-off plane. But their movement had the wrong physics, sharp turns that would tear apart any aerodynamic surface, pauses that weren't pauses, but jumps. What started as 4 points arranged in a square transformed into a diamond, then suddenly 1 point folded inward at such a sharp angle, it looked like light had stopped being a dot and become an edge. The motion was instantaneous, like a page flipping. I blinked, and the geometry had changed again. Corners, forming and reforming. More geometry than flight. I checked the scope for reflection, tapped the eyepiece, thinking maybe an internal glitch. The live feed on my phone showed the same thing, just smaller. So, it wasn't a hallucination. I started recording because that's what you do when something refuses to behave. Make a copy so later you can argue with it. After 10 minutes, I felt stupid and small and intensely awake all at once. The sky settled back into its normal scatter. An airplane crossed with blinking nav lights, a satellite moving exactly as it should. I packed the scope away, still a little clumsy, and thumbed the recording. I saw the thumbnail moving, but when I tried to open it, my phone choked. File corrupted. The polite way electronics tell you that you don't own the moment you thought you owned. I shrugged and went inside, because it was late, and rooftops always have. The pad, best ghosts. The next morning, I had to get up for work at the public library downtown, where I've been the evening reference librarian for 3 years. The job is mostly lending answers and shushing teenagers. Library work is sensible, which is why what happened next felt doubly strange. At 8:15, walking out of the staff entrance, I noticed 2 men on the sidewalk across the street. I noticed them because the morning felt ordinary. And then the men were there, 2 dark silhouettes in suits unlike anything you see on a Tuesday outside a library. Black wool, impossibly crisp. 2 men stood under the awning of a closed storefront, perfectly still. Their ties were narrow, shoes gleaming like new. They weren't talking, moving, or even pretending to check their phones. Something about their precise, camera-like stillness made my stomach drop. They looked like movie extras waiting for a director's cue. I told myself I was being ridiculous. People wait on sidewalks all the time. Maybe they were waiting for a friend or were private security. Despite my rationalization, I changed my route to the staff entrance, moving closer to the library door. As I passed the bakery window, I caught them in my peripheral vision. They were still there, watching intently. My focus wavered. A colleague asked about genealogy microfilm, and I pointed absently before turning to check the roof video I'd recently recovered on my backup drive. The file opened, revealing a strange anomaly. A single white frame where the light seemed to fold inward, erased in an instant. No matter how I scrubbed through, the white frame remained, lasting the length of a heartbeat. At 11, I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. He seemed skeptical, but let me go. When I exited through the staff entrance, the men had moved closer to the newsstand under the plane trees. They continued their unbroken surveil. Ants, watching the library door. They didn't follow or approach me. They simply stood in that unsettling, spectator silence as I rounded the corner and headed home, my chest tight. The afternoon stretched out before me, seemingly ordinary. Driving home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting suited men to be trailing me like in a bad movie. The street was typical, a delivery van, distant trains, a kid on a bicycle, someone mowing a lawn. I knew I should have called someone, the police, a friend, my manager. But how do you explain? 2 men are staring at my workplace. It sounded absurd, so I sat on my couch, the strange encounter swirling in my mind. Something wasn't right. It started with a strange white frame on my video that I couldn't explain. I tried finding it again on my clipboard and even pulled out the backup card from the glove box. But the next day, the recording behaved differently. It would play up to that white frame and then suddenly jump forward, as if someone had edited the world's continuity. Strange occurrences began to stack up over the next 2 days. My apartment clock mysteriously lost 7 minutes before catching back up. My neighbor mentioned her baby monitor had picked up a burst of static at 2 a.m. Not a voice or melody, just a thin sweep like an old radio's breath. My phone battery drained unusually fast. The weather app on my tablet kept changing, first showing rain for the next week, then displaying a completely different forecast. These were small, plausible glitches, each wearing the disguise of coincidence. When I returned to work on Wednesday, I initially felt clear-headed. But then I saw them again near the newsstand, those men in suits, watching the door, tracking everyone's movements. A mother with a stroller paused, looked at them, and hurried away with a changed demeanor. A bus driver and a shopkeeper exchanged a knowing glance before shrugging it off. The men continued their vigilant observation. When I left early at lunchtime, they watched me intently. Their faces were blank, like identical copies. No sunglasses, nothing that connected them to the city around them. I kept my head down while walking, feeling an unsettling sense that they knew exactly which pocket held my telescope key, that they had memorized the white frame of my video like a precise schedule. I considered alternatives: parking across town, staying at a friend's place, changing clothes, and disappearing for a night. But I didn't. I walked home because habit is a powerful anchor. That evening, I tried to maintain normalcy. I cooked pasta. I washed dishes. I pretended the sky was unchanged. The topaz street light filtering through the blinds looked familiar. I left a red headlamp in the drawer by the door just in case. And when I closed my eyes, that white frame burned brightly, a jagged memory etched behind my eyelids. I'd been noticing strange things lately. Something about the city felt off, like being watched, but not quite sure by what. 2 days in a row, I'd left work early, and each time, 2 men in suits stood across the street, just staring until I disappeared. That night, we were driving home on Route 47 after midnight. The road was slick from earlier rain, highway lamps casting long, smeary reflections. Maya dozed beside me, Eli munched crackers in the back, and the baby monitor hummed softly with our daughter's breathing. A typical late-night drive, 2 hours from my sister's place to our driveway. Then I saw it, a soft white dot hovering just above telephone pole height off to our right. At first, I thought it might be a drone. Local hobbyists sometimes fly over the fields. But it wasn't moving like a plane or helicopter. No blinking red light, just a steady glow. I slowed around a road, curve, and watched. The light tilted slightly, adjusting its angle. Then something strange happened. It fell into step with our car, maintaining about 20 miles per hour to our right. When I accelerated to pass a slow tractor, the light matched our speed precisely. No wobbling, no fighting the wind. It tracked us as if invisibly tethered to our vehicle. "You see that?" I muttered. Maya barely opened her eye. Eli, craning his neck, asked, "Is that a star?" in a tone seeking confirmation. We pulled into Maple Grove gas station, our usual stop. Maya likes the bathrooms, and Eli wanted more crackers. I killed the engine and everything changed. I still can't explain those lights on the roof, the men on the sidewalk, or whether the missing frame is a glitch, a cut in time, or some electronic trick playing with my nerves. But something was definitely watching. The light hung like an unnatural punctuation mark against the grey sky, and the air inside the cab felt thick. 2 pumps down, a black sedan eased into the space without hitting the lights. No one waved or opened a door. It sat there, engine ticking as if it had just finished a drive. 2 men stepped out. Black suits, black ties, pale shirts, nothing printed, no lanyards, no logos. One walked with hands folded at his front, avoiding fidgeting. The other kept his gaze level, occasionally glancing at the pump price board. They stood watching as we were the only car in the small convenience lot, looking like an ordinary family mistake with headlights on and pillows half sticking out of the back. I remember thinking there was no reason for anyone in a suit to be here at that hour, unless they'd missed a flight or were simply bored. Inside, Tom the attendant, who knows half the county by voice, made a small joke about the rain and recent power outages. He glanced at the men, then the pumps, then at me, seeming to gauge whether our presence would complicate his night. When we returned to the car, the sedan's passenger approached. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested practiced precision. His face was unremarkable, too neat, with a kind of corporate neutrality that made him instantly forgettable. "You folks should take a different route home," he said, his tone as neutral as a weather report. No introduction, no explanation. He looked at me and Maya as if we were a mere traffic routing decision, not a family driving late. "Excuse me," I responded, because it seemed like the normal thing to say. He repeated it, "Different route." I was tired and wanted to get on the road, and the rational thoughts were lining up. The car was idling, and something felt off, maybe a roadblock, a fallen tree, or something the man had spotted earlier. "Is there a detour sign? Is Route 47 blocked?" He glanced at the gas pumps and then back at me. "We advise it," he said, using that precise word. A fraction of a turn, and another man materialized like a shadow behind him. Maya was already buckling Eli into the booster seat, keys in hand. "Look," she said softly, trying not to offend a potentially helpful stranger. "We're set to go." The man's smile was a small, practiced line reminiscent of salesmen who've repeated the same pitch countless times. "We work with interests that prefer discretion," he continued. "It's better if you avoid the lowland." The word lowland settled in my mind with a dull thud. I knew that stretch of highway well. It dipped near the old mill, low and flat, where water collected during heavy rains. We'd driven it countless times, returning from family visits. It was shorter, and I loved how the road wound through the trees at night. Puddles could hide a washed-out culvert, and the car behind us sat like a chess piece, waiting to move. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, because politeness seemed appropriate. We knew nothing about these men, but anyone could offer advice about a road closure. He nodded slightly, returned to his sedan, and the other man joined him. The car pulled away without a signal, without hesitation, vanishing from the lot's edge like an illusion. We took the road he suggested, cutting wide through the ridge instead of the lowland. That dot followed us from the station, perfectly matched to our speed until we turned onto the back road. Then it hung back for a moment and disappeared as if it had never existed. His words echoed, "Interests that prefer discretion." The phrase felt like something from lawyers or unnamed sources. I pictured various officials, utility crews, DOT contractors, an off-duty sheriff's deputy. Part of me wanted to call the station's non-emergency line, but something held me back. The sense of officialness felt weightier than mere curiosity. The night had tightened on the ridge road, with trees creating dark silhouettes against the sky. I drove slower than usual, the rain leaving the asphalt slick and dangerous. No cars followed us, no distant headlights piercing the darkness. Eli slept between the glow of crackers and the heater's hum, while Maya's head nodded drowsily. Pulling into the driveway, I let the engine run, as if the noise could provide some comfort. I watched the rearview mirror after calling my sister to thank her for dinner. No black car, no strange lights, just an ordinary night with our lawn lights softly glowing and the baby monitor's familiar static. The man's advice lingered in my mind, filed away in that mental compartment reserved for inexplicable things. In the morning, I checked the dashcam footage, something I hadn't done in years, preferring memory to the messiness of technology. The camera captured our arrival at the station, but the section with the mysterious dot showed only one clean frame where it should have been. Moments later, the cloud reflected pump lights at the lot's edge. The clip played like a scene deliberately edited, timestamps jumping erratically. My phone's files mirrored this strange behavior. The photo of Eli eating crackers had the station's metadata, but the image preview froze briefly before continuing as if nothing was amiss. I considered calling someone official or exploring the lowlands as the man had hinted, but with a family in the back seat, you choose the path of least resistance. So I made coffee, drove Eli to school, and called into work. I did what men my age do when the world seems predictably stable. I went to work, answered emails, watched people buy tickets and change plans, and filed paperwork. At lunch, an hour after the kids' nap, I walked past the station without a second thought, the kind of place you pass for gum or a cheap sandwich. It hummed with the same familiar light, unchanged and unremarkable. Orange cones were off to one side, setting up a board with flapping letters that read, "Bridge work ahead." Inside, I asked the attendant if they'd put the sign up last night. He shrugged, saying folks always put up signs when they want to be careful. He didn't know the men in suits. No one else had seen them. I keep returning to that brief, quiet hole in the footage, like gently probing an old bruise to see when it hurts. I don't know who those men were, what organization they worked for, or whether they intended to help or redirect us for their own reasons. I can't explain why the dot kept pace with us, or how it knew our turns. Our safe choices that night protected us. Taking the ridge instead of the lowland, not stopping to investigate, prevented us from being stranded in a washed-out culvert or talking to someone who might have given us an answer we weren't ready to hear. We mad. Be at home. Eli drew a picture of a car with headlights and a star, taping it to the fridge. We made breakfast and continued our day. On clear evenings, I look at the stretch of lowland and wonder about the unseen. The people in tidy suits with quiet voices keep secrets in the margins. The memory of the man at the pump lingers like a small warning, the kind that makes you take the long way for no reason you can name. My name is Ben Morales. I live on the edge of town where city lights fade and the Milky Way becomes visible on good nights. I work at the library and enjoy spending clear evenings with a Dobsonian telescope and a thermos of coffee. That night, the air was the kind of cold that makes glass sink. The dew point had dropped, and stars appeared hard and clean. I had the scope aimed near Cassiopeia, checking a double star I hadn't observed in years. At first, the object looked like a misplaced star, a bright point moving faster than an aircraft should. Then it did something inexplicable. It skipped, not a smooth curve, not the steady line of a satellite, but a literal hop. I was already on the deck when the dog started acting strange. He didn't bark but held his breath, head up, ears stiff. Having known the dog long enough to trust his instincts, I followed his stare past the maple and power lines into the sky. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. The object moved with an unnatural precision, jumping sharply across the sky. Not a meteor, not a helicopter, not a launch site rocket. It flickered like a dot being animated on a screen, disappearing and reappearing in sudden, crisp movements. I grabbed my phone and used the tracking app, pointing the scope's red dot. The app mirrored the object's strange behavior, showing tiny blips that seemed to vanish and re-enter the feed. Recording felt necessary, both for proof and to capture something my adrenaline might later distort. The camera ran, the mount hummed, and the object continued its odd pattern. After about 8 minutes, it disappeared in a way that defied explanation. Not fading, not accelerating away, but simply gone, as if someone had deleted a single frame from reality. The sky where it had been looked suddenly ordinary, with a soft white haze that made the star field look slightly off. When I reviewed the recording, the app complained about a frame drop. My laptop claimed the file was intact, but something felt wrong. I emailed Claire from the astronomy club, knowing she'd appreciate the mystery and understand the strangeness. Strange occurrences started accumulating. A blank text from an unknown number. A single thin scratch from the old car radio that went quiet immediately. Coincidence, I told myself. Old electronics, a glitchy tower. 2 days later, the pattern intensified. The cloud video now had a single frame of pure white where the object had vanished. My backup SD card reported a bad sector when I tried to copy the file locally. Claire laughed when I described these events, telling me not to lose sleep over patterns. But something was happening, and I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I'd noticed the sedan earlier, a dark, anonymous vehicle parked just a little too long at the end of my street. 2 men sat inside, wearing suits that looked almost rehearsed, no visible badges. They watched the house. I stood on my porch with coffee, pretending to admire the weather. That's what you do when you notice strangers in dark cars. Act ordinary and hope they don't knock. 20 minutes later, they left. No one on the block had seen them. When I checked with neighbors, they just shrugged. Mrs. Halpert, who's lived across the street forever, said something about maybe a delivery, and she can tell when you're making something up. 2 days later, the boss knock came. I'd told myself not to answer, to be careful, to call Claire or the police if anyone suspicious showed up. But when I looked through the glass, the man wasn't what I'd imagined suspicious would look like. Small, clean-faced, wearing a dark suit that didn't quite fit our town. He held his hands carefully, like he was respecting the weather. Buttoned jacket, no hat, shoes that hadn't touched gravel in months. "Mr. Morales?" he asked, voice level, with an accent I couldn't place. "That's me," I replied. He smiled, not friendly. "May I come in?" I said no, telling him to step onto the porch where the dog could see him. The dog looked once and relaxed. Animals can be poor judges of uniforms sometimes. He didn't introduce himself. Instead, he started to remove a thin business card, then drew it back, as if remembering he didn't need to show me anything. "I won't take up much time," he said. "I represent parties that monitor certain aerial phenomena. If you'd given me 100 possibilities, this wouldn't have been near the top of my list. Earlier, when I'd taken the card to Claire, she'd offered to check the raw file on her computer. The folder opened, then closed. 'No read permissions,' she'd said, a phrase I never expected from someone who lives by bits and bytes. Here's the rewritten text. The encounter left me unsettled in ways I couldn't explain. A man had just visited me, speaking with a calm that felt anything but reassuring. He wore the demeanor of someone who expected complete compliance, his words carefully chosen. 'You saw something,' he had said, tilting his head slightly. His eyes, the color of old pennies, held a steady gaze that seemed to carry more weight than his actual words. When I pressed for details, he simply repeated that certain things are better left uncharted. Strangely, he made no demands. No request for my footage, no insiste, nace on deleting files. Just a cryptic directive to leave it alone, just a matter-of-fact certainty that I would understand and comply. After he left, moving with precise, almost mechanical grace down my walkway, I immediately called Claire. Her response was tense, her voice tight. He didn't ask for anything, she confirmed. I repeated his exact words, "Leave it." Her advice was clear: log everything, keep backup copies, and most importantly, don't investigate further. The dog, seemingly unaffected, went back to sleep. My afternoon felt suspended, like the moment after something significant had occurred, but the details remained just out of reach. I filed my original footage in multiple locations, an instinctive act of preservation. In the nights that followed, I found myself scanning the sky differently, not searching for the object, but watching for something else. Watching to see who might be watching. At the next observatory meeting, conversations split between the Leonids and my unexplained encounter, each group trying to make sense of something that defied easy explanation. My name was scattered across a group chat with a cryptic line about a white frame. Something wasn't right, but I wasn't about to spin elaborate tales or collect evidence to prove some grand conspiracy. I kept careful records anyway. Recordings, receipts, notes from the strange visit, locked securely in a box with a backup at Claire's off-site storage. Life continued its ordinary rhythm. I shelved books at work, made coffee for patrons, tried to count things that made sense. Twice a week now, I walk the dog toward town's edge where streetlights fade and sky opens wide. I don't use the telescope like before. The town feels different, watched, like a library, where someone keeps reading the same book and returning it precisely. When someone tells you not to look, the urge becomes overwhelming. The man in the suit never returned. A sedan stopped parking at my street's end, but that white frame remained in the video. Something Claire says could keep scientists awake for months. The man on my porch had suggested leaving certain things uncharted. I never understood why he warned me instead of demanding what I had, or who he represented. One thing remained clear. The sky had behaved in ways beyond my comprehension. For the first time in years, I felt smaller than the questions swirling around me. That night, I was on the roof, because it was the only place without diesel and cold plastic smells. After loading big orders, washing machines, fridges, I told Tommy I was taking my break up top. He laughed, calling me Rooftop Marcus, like it was an old joke. The roof offered a cheap folding chair, a loose cable to anchor against the wind, and a perspective that made the entire facility look miniature. Sodium streetlights on Route 7 glowed, the 24-hour diner's neon sparked in the distance, and the interstate's dark mouth flickered with headlight rivers. Late October hung in the crisp air. The night shift was dragging on, 2 hours into my 12-hour stretch, with the usual industrial park quiet humming beneath me. Something caught my eye, a light that at first looked like a chopper near the freight yard. A red beacon wouldn't have been unusual out here, but this was different. A single, steady blue-white point hung motionless about 30 or 40 feet above the loading dock. It was so low that if someone stood on tiptoes, they could almost touch it with a broom handle. The strangest part was its brightness without casting any real shadow, like a tiny moon taped invisibly to the air. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started filming. That's what people do now. Capture moments before they disappear. The video saved for a few seconds before something bizarre happened. The light didn't slowly drift or descend. Instead, it darted 3 quick, jerky movements like someone tapping a marble along a string, and then vanished beyond the tree line. No sound, no temperature change, just gone. I sat frozen, hoping irrationally that if I waited long enough, the light would reappear. The roof's ladder rattled, breaking my trance. Gary, from receiving, climbed up looking like he'd had too much coffee. When I described what I'd seen, he nodded dismissively, suggesting it might have been a drone or a billboard reflection. Down below, old Pete in the security booth was muttering about a power blip at Dock 3. The forklift operators were cracking jokes about the facility being haunted. It was the typical 3 a.m. chatter that follows something unexplained, neat, dismissive, designed to make the strange seem ordinary. Later, I tried showing Tommy the video clip, but something was wrong. The thumbnail existed, but when I tapped it, the app crashed. Even when I connected my phone to the computer to retrieve the file, the drive wouldn't mount. Whatever I'd seen seemed determined to remain a mystery. At 2:47 a.m., Pete noticed something odd about the console and assumed the city had tripped a line. The supervisor brushed it off as an old relay issue, redirecting it back to paperwork. I mentally filed it under gremlins and went for another coffee in the break room. That evening, while sliding a shrink-wrapped fridge into position, the main line's lights flickered in an unnatural way. It wasn't a storm's typical dance. This was different. The fluorescence dimmed, casting a hollow movie-like light that lasted just a half-breath. Radios in the docks stuttered briefly before returning to normal. Tommy complained about losing his playlist, and the barcode scanner hissed for a second before popping back. Forklifts ran their diagnostic beeps. We all continued working, because that's what we do. But something had changed. A quiet thread ran through the room, as if everyone had witnessed the same unexplained moment but didn't want to draw management's attention. My mind kept returning to the details, the darting light, the dead file, the camera gap. During my half hour before midnight, I felt drawn back to the roof. I wanted to catch whatever might appear when no one was watching. The ladder was up again. Cold air hit me like a sharp slap. Standing there, I watched my breath curl in the air. The facility below looked isolated, like an island. A low metallic hum hung in the air, making the chair vibrate slightly when a semi passed on Route 7. I didn't see any light that night. I just sat, listened, and watched the chain-link fence. A stupid sense overcame me, as if by trying to capture something, I now wanted to be seen. Maybe it was just a maintenance drone. Maybe my cheap phone had simply corrupted the file. I told myself I was done with this rooftop investigation, just like I'd told myself before. That moment, my original question felt small and foolish. The phone's failure seemed like another piece of the story being stripped away. The next morning, I checked the security footage with the supervisor. On the big screen, we watched the camera logs from the night. Dock 3 showed a clean 10-minute outage exactly during the time in question. The roof camera, that cheap little skylight monitor, also had a gap. A perfect blank where the timestamp simply disappeared and then reappeared. The warehouse line jolted to life at 3:10 a.m., breaking the night shift's silence. Our single office phone connects to multiple lines, and when it rings, everyone pays attention. Normally, it's about delivery manifests or procurement issues. Tony, fight, the supervisor answered since the boss was away. Her polite conversation about an invoice suddenly changed. She frowned and slid the handset toward me. Marcus, it's for you, she said, nudging it across the desk. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the receiver. The voice was measured, practiced, the kind that suggests extensive training in maintaining composure. No discernible accent, just a careful selection of words. Mr. Hale, he said, using my full name with an authority that discouraged interruption. Don't stay on the roof after dark again, he stated. It wasn't a request, but a directive delivered with an almost paternal tone, like someone reminding you to bundle up on a cold day. No introduction, no official credentials, just a direct instruction. I asked who was speaking, as anyone would when receiving such a cryptic command. A soft click, reminiscent of a cigarette being lit, punctuated the silence. He responded as if my question was unnecessary. We watched the property. It's better for you to stay off the roof after dark. For your own safety, for everyone's. His tone wasn't threatening, yet it carried an undeniable weight. The calm confidence suggested someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Who are you? I pressed. What do you mean about the roof? He repeated his warning with a patience that sent a chill down my spine. Leave the roof to the professionals. And don't try to record again, he added, as if it were the most obvious instruction in the world. I stared at the desk, focusing on an old coffee ring. My supervisor cleared her throat but kept her distance. The usual night shift static hummed around us. Desperate for some official context, I asked, "Is this the sheriff?" I wanted a case number, something to make sense of this strange encounter. "No," he replied simply. "Good night, Mr. Stutter." "Good night, Hale." The line went dead. The clock read 3:14 a.m. when I set down the handset. The security monitors showed nothing but grainy live feeds, their blankness stretching across the wall. Something was certain in my mind. The man who called had been standing between Dock 3 and the roof when I filmed, but I had no proof. No one else did either. When I asked Pete about the cameras during the outage, he just shrugged and said his console had flashed, but the log had sorted itself. Tommy made a joke about roof patrol, like he was setting up something for later. We laughed, because that's what people do when faced with something unsettling. Driving home that night, I kept my headlights on through the back roads and moved slightly slower than usual. The man hadn't yelled or threatened me like in some dramatic TV scene. He simply told me not to be there. And somehow, that was enough to make me tuck the phone away and not revisit the footage. I can't explain why I obeyed. Maybe it was how he used my name, like he knew me completely. Maybe it was how the missing footage, camera gap, and power blip had blended into one strange moment, and his voice just fit perfectly into that scene. Now I'm back on the floor. The roof is closed after midnight, a new policy the supervisor posted without explanation, just saying it was to protect employees. Pete's console shows no other gaps. Tommy keeps quiet now. I still think about that small light, how it didn't cast shadows like normal. My phone stays in my pocket. I haven't tried filming from the roof since. In the break room, the skylights look like blinking eyes. When I close the warehouse door and step into the cold, I always look up at the roof before turning onto Route 7. I don't know what we saw that night, what prompted that call, telling me to stay away, and I'm not brave enough to find out. We had been driving back from my sister's place in Lebanon, Missouri. Late, near midnight, with roads growing empty outside the small towns. Aaron, my wife, was dozing in the passenger seat. The radio played low, just enough to keep me alert. The radio signal started breaking up past Conway. At first, just static, which seemed normal. But then voices crept in, flat and monotone like an old intercom. Fragmented words drifted through, not quite making sense. Aaron stirred as I turned up the volume. "What's that?" she mumbled. "Radio's acting up," I said casually. The signal cut out, then returned with voices overlapping. almost like two people talking simultaneously. Aaron sat up, scanning the window as if searching for the source. Just before I could switch it off, the headlights illuminated a dark sedan parked on the shoulder. No hazard lights, no signs of trouble. Two men in black suits stood by the passenger side, their movements deliberate and slow. One raised his hand, palm out, signaling us to stop. I slowed but didn't halt completely. Something felt off. No official markers, no other vehicles. Their stance was unnervingly symmetrical. Black fedoras pulled low, heads too still. As we passed, they turned in perfect synchronization, tracking us with their eyes. The radio hissed again. A voice cut through clearly. "Do not continue." Then, back to garbled noise. I kept driving. Aaron twisted around, trying to get a final glimpse. The road curved, and they vanished. Suddenly, white headlights appeared in the rear-view mirror. So close, so abrupt, it made me flinch. "Is that them?" Aaron's voice was tight. "I don't know," I replied. I glanced in the rear-view mirror and pressed down on the accelerator. The headlights behind us remained fixed, neither gaining nor falling back. No matter how I adjusted my speed, the radio stayed dead, just faint static, punctuated by occasional bursts of flat voices, like snippets of a conversation we weren't meant to hear. Aaron reached for the radio dial and tried to turn it off, but nothing happened. I attempted the same, the knob wouldn't budge. We were passing the sign for Marshfield, still 10 miles away. I decided to wait until we reached more populated areas before taking any drastic action. Then the headlights behind us shifted slightly, positioning themselves directly in our lane. They weren't passing, just perfectly shadowing our every move. A couple miles later, Aaron announced, "They're gone." I checked the mirror, empty road. Looking out the back window confirmed it. No tail lights, no reflection. It was as if the vehicle had never existed. The radio went completely silent, then suddenly returned to my original station playing a country song. We didn't discuss much after that. Entering Marshfield brought some comfort. Other cars now shared the road, making us feel less isolated. At the gas station, we pulled in to catch our breath. When I killed the engine, the radio burst with static. Underneath the slow, monotone voice clearly said, "Prosh." Aaron nodded, acknowledging she'd heard it too. The rest of the drive home was uneventful, but that stretch between Conway and Marshfield, we never drive it anymore. On the third night, I sat on an old folding stool, my camera mounted on a tripod. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a pale river, sprawling across the valley. Day's heat had dissipated, leaving behind a ground that still carried hints of sun and dust. I was deep into long exposures, minus 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, stacking frames to capture the galaxy's underbelly as it arced into the desert. 3 hours of two-lane road had brought me far from any town. Only a distant tower's red blink and the highway's eastern glow broke the darkness. Something caught my eye before I could identify any distinct shape. The distortion rippled through the air, causing stars to smear sideways for a fleeting moment. It reminded me of heat shimmering off a car hood on summer afternoons. At midnight, the landscape stretched out before me in live view, zoomed to the horizon. The pixels seemed alive, the ground shimmering like an oil slick on asphalt. Suddenly, an angular shape emerged against the warped sky, too precise to be a cloud, hovering low and half hidden by distortion. I set the camera to a 3-minute exposure and remained motionless. The desert has a way of making you feel insignificant, each breath synchronized with the shutter's rhythm. The first exposure revealed a black slab in the lower third, with a smear where something had been. Scrolling through the raw file, I caught a glimpse of it again, an outline with sharp corners, like the back of a triangle, wrapped in rippling air. A half-formed joke crossed my mind about finally capturing something worth printing. Out here, my phone had no signal. That was intentional. I backed up the frames to my small SSD and sat with my thermos, watching the sky rotate overhead. An unusual silence hung in the air, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. 2 ridges away, the Jeep's dome light flickered as the man I'd seen earlier returned to his truck. For a moment, everything felt normal, the way dark, empty places often do when nothing dramatic happens. I reminded myself to be careful about what I said. When you're alone in such a vast space, careful takes on a different meaning. I looped my camera strap through my belt and checked the battery repeatedly. The second exposure showed nothing, but the first file remained a smear with geometric lines reminiscent of a child's kite drawing. Zooming in, I adjusted the raw sliders, searching for lens flare. The edges shifted with each exposure, sometimes smooth, sometimes faceted, always surrounded by that same stray Ange jitter. Sleep eluded me. Around 3 a.m., while repacking a lens, a truck rumbled up behind my camp. Its headlights stopped on the shoulder, beams extinguished. I froze. Vehicles rarely venture out here this late. The engine idled, then fell silent. Someone stepped out, gravel crunching beneath their feet, metal softly clinking. A low, conversational voice called out, "Photographer." 2 men stepped into the circle of light cast by my camp lantern, their movements deliberate and slow. Dark suits hung on them, tailored just so clean and precise, with sleeves carefully measured to blend into the background. No badges, no official identification. They were the kind of men who knew how to be invisible. One was tall, his face a landscape of shadows that folded like an old map. The other was shorter, carrying himself with a practiced calm that spoke of professional training. They knew exactly how to occupy space without drawing attention. "Mr. Rivera," the thinner man said. No introduction, no preamble. I froze. I hadn't told anyone my name. The dirt road had been empty all day. My throat went dry. Something animal and instinctive warned me. "National Security Review," he added, the words hanging between us like a directive. His smile never reached his eyes. No wallet emerged, no credentials displayed, just hands loosely at his sides, waiting. I thought about all those conspiracy forums, those late-night shows about mysterious government agents, yet something in his tone suggested authority, the kind that didn't need volume to be heard. "You want to see my pictures?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The shorter man was already unfolding a slim tablet, as if my compliance was a foregone conclusion. "We'd like to review your work," he said, "for everyone's safety." The word hazard rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, like something he'd sparred countless times before. He spoke of transferring files as casually as ordering coffee technicians waiting quietly at the other end. My instincts screamed no, but the vast desert suddenly felt claustrophobic. I'm not someone who confronts authority easily. "Do you have ID?" I asked. "What agency?" "Federal. Special Review Team," came the reply. "We don't want to create alarm. Nothing for the public to worry about. We just need to look at your images." The leather case hung between us, flat and neutral. "Permission," he said, and the word landed like a stone. There was a moment when I wanted to bail, drive back to the highway, and find the first diner. But something about the claim intrigued me. Was it relief, disguised as a demand? I asked about credentials, requesting a card or a contact number. The thin man hesitated, his mouth opening and closing. I half expected him to flash a badge, but he didn't. "We can follow proper channels," he said, but time was limited. A review now would expedite the process. Afterward, I thought of 100 small actions I could have taken. Demanding 2 forms of ID, checking their identification in the lantern's glow, calling the non-emergency line to verify a team's dispatch, securing the SSD in my glove box. Instead, I did none of those things. I offered to show them a single frame on my camera's tiny screen. They leaned in together, as quiet as churchgoers examining a painting. The file revealed the smear again, its dark faceted edge wrapped in a shimmer. The thin man's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. "Interesting," he said. Not, "That's it," or "That's nothing," but a cryptic reference to a watchmaker and movement. "Are you taking my card?" I finally asked. "No," the smaller man replied. "Not now." He pressed a thin slip of paper into my palm with instructions to call a number the next morning. His handwriting was Prec, S and impersonal, a central office line with no name or extension. They retreated to their truck, sat briefly under its dark hood, then slowly drove away. Dust settled as if someone had placed a lid on the landscape. Sleep eluded me. At first light, I packed up, leaving the thermos half full and the SSD wrapped in a plastic bag within my camera bag. An unsettling feeling persisted that I'd encounter them again around the next bend. By midday, I called the number. Disconnected. When I later examined the files on my home monitor, several frames had vanished, not corrupted, simply absent. The raw folder contained blanks where files should have been. The images I'd shown them remained, including the one with the outline, but neighboring frames had disappeared. I ran checks, meticulously investigating every possibility. Backups are a lifeline when things go wrong with digital files. A copy I'd made on the SSD started acting up a day after I first saved it. Some files just get temperamental, and drives can fail without warning. So I kept multiple copies of the images, both printed and digital. because you never know when a file might vanish. I considered sharing a carefully cropped still or sending it to a university friend who understood optics, but I didn't. I just closed the folder and walked away. Later, at the coffee shop inside the camera store, people were curious about some parts of the story but dismissive of others. No one suggested I'd made a mistake by showing the frame, and no one could explain the blank files. The thin man's interesting look kept playing in my mind like a half-remembered headline. A week later, a local story surfaced about a maintenance crew reporting strange lights near a cell tower in the next county. The accounts were vague, just a flash, a shimmer, nothing definitive. I sent an anonymous link to my university friend, asking about refracted air and sensor artifacts. He noted that some raw image edges looked inconsistent with typical lens flare. He promised to examine it more closely, but never did. His thesis defense consumed his attention, and then life simply moved on. A slip of paper sits in my wallet, nestled between a motel business card and a diner receipt. The number remains non-functional. A month later, I returned to the desert, setting up in almost the same location, the only way I knew to satisfy my own curiosity. The nights were clear, the Milky Way as magnificent as before. I watched the horizon, waiting. Nothing entered the frames like that previous anomaly. Still, I continued photographing long and short exposures, just to keep my hands busy. I preserved copies strategically, one for myself, another in a fireproof bank box, and a third with a gallery friend who subtly inquired about potential national security interest. We didn't press each other for details. I never handed over the raw files, and I haven't heard from those men again. I'm unsure whether that makes me lucky or naive. The image remains on my drive with some surrounding frames now missing. When I examined the pixel smear, questions continue to swirl. I was driving home late one weeknight along County Route 9, just outside Millerfield, when something caught my eye. A dark shape moved slowly above the tree line, drifting like a ragged cloud being dragged across the maple tops. No lights. No sound. At first, I thought it was just a tarp caught in a branch. But then it shifted higher, and for a moment, I glimpsed an edge with a pale underside, almost like fabric illuminated by a lamp, the kind of thing that makes you do a double take. I slowed down. You always slow when something feels off on a two-lane road. The truck that had been tailing me at a distance nudged closer, then backed off. Other cars seemed to vanish, leaving me alone with this strange presence. My headlights carved neat rectangles into the shoulder, and the thing above the trees kept moving, almost like it was following my path. I pulled off by the old Berry farm where a bent sign and stone wall marked a small lay-by. The car's radio was tuned to dead static, which I only noticed after the engine died down. Complete silence surrounded me, broken only by my own breathing. The shape drifted eastward, sliding along the wood's edge. A flock of starlings lifted from a telephone wire and resettled, unnaturally calm. No panic, no scattered flight, and that struck me more than the object itself. I pulled out my phone, doing what everyone does now. The camera app opened to a flat grey viewfinder that kept hunting for focus without finding anything steady. The timestamp was correct, and my photo folder showed yesterday's pictures alongside a new blank thumbnail. I laughed, a short, nervous chuckle that sounded too loud in the quiet. When I turned back, a sedan was idling down the lane, lights off. Its grille caught the last of the dusk like a pair of eyes. This wasn't just any black, it was that smooth, deep factory black you rarely see in an area where cars are usually older and beige. The windows were darker than legally allowed. Something was definitely not right. I was driving late at night, and something felt off. A black sedan trailed behind me, maintaining a steady 2-car length distance. It moved with an unsettling precision, like someone deliberately avoiding drawing attention. I kept checking my mirrors. Each time the car remained, a dark rectangle against the night. At first, I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe we were headed the same direction. A delivery driver, perhaps, or just another local. Then my phone signal dropped. 3 bars vanished in seconds. The GPS turned into a spinning wheel, which unnerved me more than I could explain. The familiar road suddenly felt different. Doubt started creeping in. I took the longer route through town, passing the diner and the single blinking red light. I hoped the car might turn off, but it remained constant, patient as a shadow, tracking my every move. At the intersection of Main, another car spun through, but the sedan behind me barely shifted. When the light turned green, I looked back. The dark mass was exactly where it had been. No signal, no movement. I tried turning down Maple Avenue to see if it would pass, It didn't. I turned up the radio, seeking comfort in classical music. But even the sound felt strange. The string quartet played briefly before cutting out, leaving an eerie silence punctuated by ghostly music drifting through the passenger window. It felt like being in a room where someone had suddenly stopped breathing. Near Millersfield, I turned toward the high school, drawn to the parking lot's lights and the marbled reflection of its sign. The sedan maintained its distance, never wavering. For a moment, I considered stopping to confront whoever was following me, but I could already imagine how that would sound to others. Irrational, dramatic. So I kept driving the black sedan, a constant, silent presence behind me. I got out of the car at the Walgreens on Oak, parked under a floodlight, with my phone gripped tightly in my fist. The night felt heavy, pressing down like a lid. A sedan pulled into the lot and idled behind a delivery truck, seeming almost purposeless in its positioning. When I emerged with a paper bag from the pharmacist, the car remained in place. Two men in dark coats, unhatted and carrying nothing, stepped out. They moved with a synchronized precision reminiscent of trained athletes, their steps practiced and silent, like a scene from a movie. One man, perhaps in his 40s, looked directly at me as I crossed the parking lot. His short hair, clean-shaven face, and impeccably tailored suit spoke of a certain professional polish. The other man's face was initially turned away, but his jawline suggested a hardness of character. The first man's gaze met mine for less than a second before offering a small, polite nod, neither friendly nor unfriendly, just neutral. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice as ordinary as one might hear in a grocery store checkout line. It was the tone of someone casually checking in. "I'm fine," I responded, "just heading home." He tilted his head slightly, as if reading an invisible map. "Keep to the main roads tonight," he advised. "Avoid the ridge if you can." His words carried the authority of an officer's instruction, though no uniform was present. The advice was simultaneously neutral and specific. Ironically, while I rarely drove the ridge at night, I had been planning to do so. The route was shorter, prettier, a winding path along a hollow offering a complete valley view on clear nights. I convinced myself his suggestion was simply helpful and well-intentioned. We stood in the Walgreens sign's glow, appearing like chance acquaintances meeting during an errand. His eyes were an unremarkable color, reminiscent of old coins. In that moment, I realized I didn't know his name, nor did I need to. Windows were closed. The air conditioning hummed softly. A trash truck somewhere down Oak pulled its compressor, and the sound spread through the small space between us like a reminder that life continues. I said thanks and walked to my car with my bag, driving off the lot and making a slow right toward the highway instead of the left that would have taken me up the ridge. The black car eased out right behind me and followed, but by the time I reached Route 22, the sedan kept its distance. Just before the bridge. It turned down a side street with such quiet resolution that I realized it had never been following me to press me, but simply to watch the choice I made. Something about this bothered me, and I felt a strange relief when its tail lights faded. At home, the house felt too bright. When I turned on the porch light, Eli, my neighbor's kid, sat on his porch with a bike, a dog, and a face full of late-night cereal breath. I said hello and kept my hand on the screen door like a protective charm. Inside, I locked the deadbolt and sat on the couch, television on, letting the light fill the room and make the world look ordinary. Later, I told my sister about it on the phone in fragments. A shape over the trees, a phone glitch, a black car following. She urged me to call the police or the sheriff, but I refused. They would ask for details I couldn't provide, a location, a license plate, proof. All I had was a blurry image and a polite man's advice to stick to main roads. Days passed. Newscasters said nothing. The farmer from the berry field down the lane visited with a crate of strawberries, laughing when I shared my story. His laugh suggested both humor and a warning to be cautious. My phone returned to normal, and the photo folder still held that blank thumbnail I hadn't deleted. Sometimes I'd stare at the gray, trying to recall the thing's edge in the trees. A small, steady feeling lingered under my skin like a held breath. For a week, I kept to the main roads, partly because the man's voice had been calm and practical, partly because I wanted to obey someone who had been polite. It seemed a small concession. Yet sometimes at night, I'd still pull onto the ridge and park at the overlook, more out of habit than bravery, to see the valley lights. I had been out on the skiff because the tide turned the way it does in late September. My name is Eddie Morales, and I fish nights when the town sleeps and restaurants aren't buying. The river that feeds the harbor goes full mouth on you, so if you want to catch fluke or stripers, you go where the current takes them. That night, the air was thick with salt and wet rope, humid but not warm, with a low fog rolling in from the headlands. My ladder lights were on, a small thermos of coffee tucked under the bow, and the radio a soft hiss in the console. I saw the first light maybe a half-mile out. At first, I thought somebody had left a headlamp on a dinghy. Then another popped up, then another like soft lures bouncing on the surface. But they didn't bob. They came straight up, slow and steady. Soon they were at least 20, maybe 30 feet in the air, hovering as if they'd found a place to rest in the fog. They didn't make a sound. They weren't the usual navigation lights either. Pale blue, steady, not blinking. One broke away and drifted inland, cutting a diagonal beam like someone dragging a pencil through the mist. The lights rose out of the water, like somebody was lifting a string of fishing buoys straight up and into the sky. Sometimes I remind myself that the sky could be ordinary. I've gone up and found nothing but the hush of crickets and the distant blink of a highway. Another time there was a thin smear like the one I'd seen before, but it vanished before I could be sure, and my phone stuttered when I tried to record it. Whatever the men were watching, if they were watching at all, didn't drag anyone away or break a public law. They left nothing but a memory and a suggestion, a shadow that matched my pace until I made a different decision. I did not go back to the ridge that night, and the car did not follow when I turned toward the lit streets. Sometimes I wonder if they were trying to warn me or to guide me, and I do not know which would be worse. For now, what I have is a blank thumbnail in my phone and a polite instruction given by two men in sharp coats. I lock my doors a little earlier than I used to and keep the porch light on until dawn. I take the long way home on odd nights, and when the sky is clear, I look up and tell myself to be ordinary. The rest of it, what I saw, who they were, stays in that grey place on the screen where a picture should be. The fog swirled thick as soup while I navigated back toward the dock, my boat cutting a slow circle through the water where the strange lights had just been. My line hung slack, a bad sign. The fish finder was eerily quiet, stripped of its usual sonar chorus of bait and school movements. Just a thin, flat beep replacing the normal electronic chatter. Earlier, something impossible had happened above the sea. A constellation of lights seemed to unravel, rising straight up into the mist after a school of currents slid away like a dark hand pulling back from the water's surface. My thermos cracked the silence as I swallowed coffee, my hand still steady on the skiff's controls despite a tightness growing in my chest. I tried to capture the moment on my phone, managing only a few frames before the battery died dramatically, from 12% to nothing in the time it takes to mutter, "What the hell?" A nervous laugh escaped me, the kind you use to keep yourself calm when reality doesn't make sense. As I approached the dock, two men stood by the pilings. Their suits were so black they seemed to absorb light itself. One carried a raincoat despite clear weather, the other wore shoes with an unnaturally clean shine, as if rubber had never touched mud. They watched me without speaking, without moving, just present and observant. "Good night," I said, "because that's what you say at docks, even when your voice wants to ask more." They stepped closer, moving as if they were already beside me. "Did I do the night runs?" I explained, adjusting the cleat with hands that felt heavy and slow. The fog dragged sound toward the harbor, making our conversation feel oddly intimate despite being out in the open. Two men stood near me, their practiced smiles never quite reaching their eyes. "You out late?" one asked, both of them turning back to the water, as if we were watching the same distant scene. Lights flickered. The shorter man said with careful deliberation, each word measured like a weight. "Marine life," he continued, and something in his tone suggested more than a simple observation. They were about 2 paces apart, these men, close yet somehow distant. The taller one nodded, his gaze sweeping across the water. The tide was right for my run, and I knew every movement, every subtle shift of the landscape around me. "I apologize, but it seems like the text you wanted me to rewrite is missing. Could you please provide the full, original text that you would like me to restructure?"